includes Mr. Jeff Teal. Jeff, you'll identify yourself. There. Hunter jumper, equitation trainer, judge with extensive career experience in equestrian sport. Dr. Ken Allen, chair of the USEF Drugs and Medications Committee. Ms. Elizabeth Goff, Vice President of the USEF, member of the Board of Directors, multiple world champion and grand champion saddlebred, owner, exhibitor, and breeder. And Laura Graves, Olympic medalist in dressage this past year. So we want to thank you for agreeing to serve on the panel and for being with us today. The invited presenters include Dr. Jim Hurd, PhD, Dr. Stephen Schumacher, DVM, Dr. Patrick McHugh, DVM, PhD in Diplomat ACT, Dr. Jeff Vernon, DVM, Mary Babbitt, President of the United States Hunter Jumper Association, and Sissy Wicks, trainer, owner, large R judge, and member of the USSA Board of Directors. So thank you for being here today and presenting. Online comments have now totaled actually 130 since this once is done. We have over 100,000 USDF members who were eligible to participate in providing comments. Email and social media outreach was done for engagement of people in the process. All the comments have been recorded and notes sent to the sender to verify that he did receive the comment and recorded it, and the panel members will read all comments before they make a recommendation. Generally speaking, the comments fell into the following categories. Regimate as a substitute and easier to handle, and calming my horse, and I don't think it tranquilizes them. Don't ban it for mares, don't ban it completely, and what is the science? So the next steps that will occur is the video of today's workshop will be available on the USEF network via the workshop webpage for on-demand viewing. Publications and research referenced during the workshop is currently available on the workshop's webpage at usef.org. Comments will continue to be submitted to the workshop email, which is up here on the PowerPoint, until close of business on March 20th, 2017. After March 20th, the panel will review all comments received during the workshop and online, and will reply to substantive questions by April 30th, 2017. Then the Board of Directors, if the panel is ready, will consider the recommendation that comes forward from the panel and what actions, if any, to take regarding the use of Depo-Provera in competition horses at USEF licensed competitions. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Jim Hurd to join us as our first presenter today. And Matt, fine, and ask you to PowerPoint present this. Oh, actually, thank you.
It's obviously, let me begin by saying what an honor it is to have an opportunity to be a part of your forum today. Thank you for inviting me. You know, I tackled a very similar topic as today's a few years back at an AQHA Judges Seminar. I gave what I thought at the time was a simple explanation of what I believe is the greatest challenge our industry faces in the immediate future: animal welfare and our perception to the general public. Little did I know that the Quarter Horse Journal would publish that talk and that it would be picked up by the Arabian Association, the Color Breeds Associations, Tennessee Walking Horse Magazine, and other groups around the country. Later, I gave a very similar talk at the NCHA convention and another to the Friends of the Sound Horse Conference. And finally, I gave one to the forum on NRHA on equine medication. My biggest shock from all of these presentations was the number of equine-related blogs managed by concerned horse owners, horse lovers, and breeders who contacted me and published the article on their web pages. Trust me when I tell you that there are a lot of people in and out of the horse industry that believe we, the show industry, need to take care of our horses differently than we do. I tell you about the reaction to these presentations to point out not only the importance of the topic we're going to talk about today, but the overall concerns that members of the general equine public have for the horse, and its well-being, including the use of medications to enhance performance. For some of us, horses in our industry are a passion, and for others, it's not only a passion, but it's our livelihood. Like each of you, I know that I still get excited to talk about my own horses, to see great horses perform, and to meet other people who understand what these amazing athletes are capable of doing. If you want, I'll tell you about my filly that I went up to Ocala to see yesterday, my thoroughbred filly that we own part of. But sometimes in the midst of all this excitement of competition, training, and breeding, it's easy for us to forget that horse ownership, showing and training are privileges bestowed to relatively few of us. Let me repeat, working with horses is a privilege that few get to enjoy. However, we sometimes also forget that this privilege comes with responsibility. With participation, we assume a responsibility to be a steward of our industry, a protector of the equine athlete and our industry, and we are also a conduit to new owners who want to share our excitement and the enjoyment of horses and horse showing. Those coming to us as new owners are more careful than ever about where they spend their money and how much enjoyment they're going to get from their expenditures. They are more careful than ever about the environment in which their children will be participating. In my opinion, the magnitude of this issue is heightened by two compounding factors. The first is the general public that is more vocal, has greater exposure to more information from web pages, blogs, tweet, Facebook, and whatever the taste of the month is today in social media than at any other time in history. But they are actually less experienced and knowledgeable in actual animal care and husbandry than any generation that preceded it. You often hear the quote about rural America is 2% of our population. Actually, those in agriculture is less than 1% today. So we're dealing with a public that's 98% of our population. The second factor, and just as important, are our own actions as an industry. Our own habituation to our actions and at times our blind defense of what we do without thinking about what it looks like to those outside our industry. Members of the public love horses, and they still want to show them. Yet there is a decline in many of our disciplines. This is occurring during a period when it was recently pointed out in a national survey, 30% of the American public not involved in horses today would like to be more involved with horses but aren't for a variety of reasons. 30% of the American public not involved would like to be more involved. So what are we doing that keeps these people from coming to our shows, buying our horses, and getting more involved? I believe that one thing that's happening is that we as an industry are in a period when our personal horse industry ethics conflict with those of the general public. I want to make sure that we understand why this is important, especially in a time of reduced disposable income and increased competition for the public's free time. Let me take a few minutes to explain what we mean about societal ethics and beliefs, and then personal ethics. Societal ethics or beliefs are simply those beliefs that the majority of society accepts as normal behavior. Many are based upon the Ten Commandments or other religious teachings. For example, as a society, we don't rob, steal, cheat, or kill, nor do we tolerate those who do. We also don't abuse children or animals. Violations of these societal ethics lead to the birth of social activism. In our case, animal activists or animal welfare participants. Activist groups are born and become spokespersons for society when they can no longer ignore activities, atrocities, or social violations they consider not just offensive but wrong, and that we as an industry are not addressing ourselves. When dealing with animal activists, I often think of the words of the great former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, when he said, and this wasn't in relationship to animal welfare folks, said, "The greatest deterrent to freedom are men and women of zeal, well-meaning, but without knowledge and understanding." Let me repeat that quote. The greatest deterrents to freedom are men and women of zeal, well-meaning, but without knowledge or understanding. Many in animal activist roles are passionate about their belief. Not always well-informed, but passionate. And they certainly have a committed zeal for their beliefs. And trust me, they outnumber us. So rather than just automatically condemning activists, I believe we need to make sure that in the eyes of society, we're not violating societal ethics. That we as owners, trainers, and exhibitors are not doing anything that is not just distasteful, but also unacceptable to the general public. If I just described our social ethics, let's also look at personal ethics and how we develop those beliefs. Most of our personal ethics come from experience within our own personal lives, our society, or particularly a microcosm of the general society, such as horse showing. For example, there's not a one of us in this room that does not understand the importance of winning. All of us know that in training we have to ask for more than we expect in the show ring. We know that horses hardly ever do more than they're asked to do either at the show or at home. We know that we won't win unless our horses are well trained and well presented, and thus we won't be able to make a living, win, or be able to sell our horses. However, we cannot forget that we can't sacrifice our reputations, our animals, or our industry in order to win. We must never forget how much members of the general society love horses. We shouldn't expect them to understand the intricate nature of our industry, but as leaders of our industry, we must realize that they will not accept abuse or the appearance of it, excessive medications, or a win-at-all-cost mentality. We shouldn't either. If we were all honest with ourselves, I suspect we started our love affairs with horses feeling exactly the same way as the general society. However, as we became more deeply entrenched in the showing winning aspect of our industry, we may have lost contact with why we entered the industry at the beginning. We shift our emphasis to winning rather than enjoyment. We become so focused on winning that we even forget what our actions look like or sound like to other people. The psychological descriptive term of this is habituation. It is defined as a reduction of behavioral response to a specific stimulus that recurs repeatedly. In other words, in the case of extreme training techniques, excessive medication, and a win-at-all-cost mentality, we learn to ignore those stimuli that at first we would have found offensive. We ignore those actions because we want to win and believe that those practices are necessary to win. We ignore them because we see successful people do them. Worse, we ignore what we see happening because we're afraid of being embarrassed and ostracized for speaking out. Habituation prevents us from seeing that some of our actions and techniques are counter to our responsibility of protecting the horse and its dignity in our events. Consequently, we learn to ignore our responsibility to societal ethics in which we were reared. Even worse, we start to defend our actions as being right and okay, and that the general public just doesn't know. So as an industry, I think that we have to ask ourselves the right question before we use a performance-enhancing drug or a training technique that could be considered inhumane. Very simply, is it the right thing to do? Would your grandmother say it's all right? Would the general members of society understand and endorse its use? Can we defend it to the general public that's not horse-oriented? Most importantly, in the case of some of our medications, can the horse be harmed by our actions? This is where the conflict between societal ethics and our own personal ethics reaches an impasse. If we can't defend it to society and give it a logical place in societal ethics, we need to stop doing it, or not allow it to happen regardless of how much it helps us to win. In addition, if you know about a product that enhances performance beyond normal training, is it fair to the other competitors and to our industry who don't know about it for you to continue to use it? I say these things understanding that we all want to win, that winning is essential in our industry, and I do understand what it takes to train a winning horse at the highest level. My real concern is about preserving our industry into another generation. What do we need to do to help our industry survive into these future generations? How do we stop the activists from gathering at our doors? For starters, I think we think about what we're doing looks and sounds to the general public and to the new people coming into our events. As leaders of your discipline and as those who are respected by your fellow members, you can choose not to accept, or defend, or more importantly, practice these actions that are distasteful to an uninformed, non-habituated public. At Colorado State University, while I was on the faculty there, I was privileged to work with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bernie Rollins. He's a philosopher who has taken on the task of protecting the welfare of all animals, particularly farm and laboratory animals. He's not a radical, but he has refused to ignore those practices to which people may have become habituated. He feels that as an industry, we, the horse industry, and in particular the show world, are the low-hanging fruit for animal activists of the world in the future. He believes that as an industry we have conflicted the line of personal ethics and societal ethics, and that in fact we are guilty of ignoring those things that we have first found offensive, and now even begun to defend. He believes that the show ring is the next place for animal activists to spotlight. My favorite quote of Dr. Rollins is, "We need to stop doing the 5% that society spends 95% of its time criticizing us for doing." Think about that for just a moment. Let's stop doing the small pieces of what we do that society spends the most time criticizing us. Each of us can think of a few things that are so obviously wrong in our shows and in training that we can't defend them to any rational person. I know that there's some of you who say the animal activists can't do anything to us. They aren't that strong. They're just radicals, and besides, they should mind their own business. If they show up, we'll just show them how tough they really are. I grew up in Tennessee in the 1960s. Pat Patterson was a well-known cutting horse trainer. He did the first clinic I ever attended as a young teenager. I got to spend a little time with him as I was growing up. He was a tough man. He worked hard every day, most of the time with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. I remember his story about being asked to not smoke in an arena in Mississippi. I won't take the time to tell you all the details, but Pat's closing line was, "Those first couple of policemen who tried to put out my cigarette were not too tough. That group that was there at the end made a believer out of me that I wasn't going to smoke in that building anymore." The reason I tell you this story is to emphasize the point. If we as an industry don't want outsiders, authorities dictating how we show and present our horses, we need to begin cleaning up what we're doing wrong. Those first few are already out there. Let's don't wait until the big group comes later. I don't think any of us want non-horse people making decisions about what we can and can't do. Let's fix what we can't defend. Another quick example for you to think about is the Ringling Brothers Circus. You think that Ringling Brothers in their wildest nightmare ever thought they would be closing their doors because they were condemned by the general public for having elephants in the circus? Yet there had been public rumblings for many years which went unheeded. Never underestimate the power of activists to make their point to the general public with societal ethics different than their own. In closing, I tell you this. There's all sorts of ways to address an issue or mistake. We can defend it, we can ignore it, hope no one notices, or we can fix it. As members of this organization, if you have a problem, you need to fix it. We can do what we know is right. We can make certain that all of our actions are dedicated not just to winning. We can do the right thing for the benefit and the future of the horse and the horse industry. Many associations are already addressing these issues. Some of you are familiar with the rule changes various breed associations are making. The racing industry has changed many of its allowable medications in discussion about the need for a uniform medication rule across all racing jurisdictions. The informed leaders of today's industry are trying to stop what we can't defend before the general public, or worse, our politicians begin to make rules independent of our industry. As you debate the issue in front of you today, you have an opportunity to make rules for the good of your industry, of your organization, but more importantly, you have a responsibility to make rules that protect the future of your horse and all of our industry. I encourage you to take on and embrace this responsibility, to pass on to the next generation a better horse and a better event that you inherited from your forefathers. As leaders, think about your future. Think about all that could happen to us if we don't do something to stop the criticism we're receiving from a horse-loving society that doesn't understand our industry. Ask yourself what you can do to pass on to the next generation of young people, breeders, exhibitors, and judges, a better medication-free, more humanely treated horse that receives medication under supervised direction and for therapeutic reasons only. Finally, let me close as I begin. Thank you for having me here today. It's been an honor. It is an honor. I've loved my life in the equine industry, as I know each of you have. We deal with an unbelievable athlete that's been good to all of us. Let's make sure we protect that athlete in our industry into the future. Thank you.
Before Dr. Hurd steps down, are there any questions from the panelists?
I don't think anybody here would argue with anything that you said.
We did have one question.
Dr. Hurd?
Yes.
So, as you talk about the habituation, are we concerned in the horse industry as a whole that we have become numb to what our day-to-day practices are? And as we approach this problem, the question is, do we do it from the standpoint of this is what we've been doing, therefore it's okay, or do we approach it from the standpoint of what's best for the horse, never mind what we've been doing?
I think as leaders, if we are the caretakers of our industry, if we're the caretaker of the horse, then for me it's always about the horse. It's not about just winning, but it's about how do we protect this horse, this breed, this organization into the future. I think none of these things did we start doing them all at one time. We started with a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and we became habituated as we went up that ladder to winning or to ignoring what we saw. And a lot of that's because we get embarrassed if we bring it up, particularly if you're not at the very top of that pyramid of trainers and winners. They say, oh, it's okay, don't worry. So for me, it's always about what's good for the horse. What are we going to do to make this horse be protected in everything we do?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I too, as Jeff said, agree with everything you've saed, and I'm curious, as the chair of and coordinator of the Equine Initiative at Texas A&M, what are you guys currently looking at, and is there anything relatable in a broad sense to the topics that you've discussed here?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. One, we do an issues class for our graduating seniors as a capstone course so that all of our graduates understand both sides of this issue. We don't want them just to get up and defend one side or the other. We want them to be able to discuss both sides. Because if you don't understand where the other side's coming from, you really can't have an open discussion. My other life is I'm on the executive committee of the American Quarter Horse Association as chair of their Animal Welfare Commission. And so I have seen that go from when we took off some of the training things that we didn't think were appropriate a show, from an association and membership that thought we were idiots and ridiculous, to now being totally on our side and saying, we get it, we understand. We have more people coming to talk to us than ever before. They're not asking, why do we have on this piece of equipment that you can't show them? And so we've really cleaned that up with our stewards program. But all breed associations are doing the same thing. Everybody's working with
Okay. Excuse me, the other thing I would add is that I think that habituation is less prevalent than what I'm hearing, and a smaller group of people that have been habituated, if that's a word.
It is a word. And you're exactly right. And it's because of this large group of society that is saying, I don't understand this. I don't know why you're doing it. I love horses. Why are you doing this to me? And so, and the majority of our industry, I think, is beginning to think that way.
I don't think they're beginning. I think that has been the case, and I think that they're becoming less and less concerned about standing up and speaking to that and looking for solutions to that.
I agree wholeheartedly. When I say again, it's been in the last 10 years.
I'll be interested to see how this particular issue feeds into habituation, but that's to be decided. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you again, Dr. Hurd. Our next presenter, Dr. Stephen Schumacher, our Chief Administrator for the USDF Department of Nutrition.
Thank you for having me. I apologize, I'm not as eloquent as Dr. Hurd, but I definitely will try and give some scope, some background to why we're here today, or what the workshop's about, or what we're talking specifically about one substance. Currently, I'm not sure, is that up on the screen?
I didn't do it.
I have not touched the computer. I don't touch this. I can talk briefly while they're getting this up there, but I just want to draw so we're looking at a drug called Depo-Provera, and that's the equivalent of hydroxyprogesterone acid. And it's a synthetic progestin, and that's what we've been looking at. In comparison, Regimate is also a synthetic progestin. Goes by the name, the drug actually is Altrenagest, the trade name is Regimate. And, how we got to where we are right now is the fact that, 25 plus years ago, while Regimate had been on the market for some time and used, I'm easily distracted. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Regimate. Regimate came on the market and it was used as a 15-day treatment. Regimate allows for foreign sources to compete in the best. It allowed suppression of estrus, and that was its purpose. The issue is that the progesterone, these progestins, synthetic progestins, would also potentially expose humans, to the effects of progesterone, and they act at the same receptors. It was used to schedule estrus breeding to maximize breeding efficiency, also in the show horse world, in the competition horse world, as well as racing. It was used to try to eliminate or minimize some of those effects of estrogen. Some of the effects of the estrus cycle in mares. It was administered orally with a syringe, or it can also be placed directly on the feet. It's contraindicated for a couple of things: use in mares having previous or current history of uterine inflammation, and in pregnant women or women who suspect they're pregnant should not handle this drug. As I mentioned, this is something that can exposure to women. It can have an effect and cause a number of different issues. But all of that was looked at when they got FDA approval. About 25 years ago or so, it became obvious that there was another form of a progestin that was out there, no synthetic progestin, and this is Depo-Provera, which is hydroxyprogesterone acetate, and that's the issue right today. This substance was shifted to, mostly from what we understand, the reason people shifted to it was due to the fact that it limited or minimized the exposure to women if they had to handle it and administer it to mares. It's an injectable medication. It's FDA approved for use in women. It's never been FDA approved for use in horses. It is administered to control ovulation, administered typically every 12 weeks. And then also it's used for post-menopausal hormone replacement therapy, also post-cancer treatment. And as kind of a side note, its actual effect in humans is it's also serves as a chemical castration to human sex offenders. We can actually administer this to men and eliminates those issues. So those are the two substances. We had Altrenagest Regimate that was developed for the horse, and we have Depo-Provera that was not developed for the horse, but was developed for women. Again, both synthetic progestins. And so when it first came out, when it first became apparent, it seemed reasonable to think, hey, this other progestin would work to eliminate the signs of estrus, to go ahead and change cycling, and there were effects. There were people effects, and primarily what happened was it limited the exposure of women to this drug. However, based on scientific research, Depo-Provera does not suppress LH levels in horses. It does not do the same thing that Regemate does. And why that's important is the suppression of LH in horses, and I believe Dr. McHugh will talk to this point, but the suppression of LH in horses limits the amount of estrogen that's formed. You don't have that rise in LH. You don't have some of the side effects down the line, behavior side effects associated with estrus. In male horses, the LH is also something that's LH is also associated with testosterone production. So LH in the mare, it increases estrogen. The LH in the stallion increases testosterone. And so by blocking those, which is what Regemate alternatives does, you can limit the level of estrogen and testosterone in these horses. Depo-Provera does not do that. So wondering what the effect of Depo-Provera is, specifically, is going back into the literature. Again, this has been prescribed for women for a long time. This is used for controlled ovulation, but also for postmenopausal hormone therapy. And there's some concerns about it in women using it long term. There's some cognitive issues. And so that's why it's been studied at that level, the level of receptors, neurotransmitter levels, and the like. Depo-Provera impacts GABA receptors just like tranquilizers does, okay, or tranquilizers do. If you remember, GABA was a substance that we forbid back in 2012 when there were people were giving it. GABA is the main principal inhibitory neurotransmitter in people and all mammalian species, and it's very, very similar across species. GABA receptors themselves are extremely similar across all mammalian species, and so a lot of that research that was done has been done in other laboratory models. It's also been done with women or on women to identify some of those changes in the brain. Research demonstrates GABA effects on males. What's also interesting is that through veterinarian feedback and member feedback, there's a great deal of support for the change in behavior with horses that have been administered this medication. But again, as we were aware of, this was not a medication that has been shown to suppress LH. So it's not working the way it was initially intended when people started using it, but it does have a secondary effect, and that effect is really at the GABA receptors. It's one of those things where this is a very unique substance in a very unique situation. This is not a new GABA. This is something that at the time, 20, 25 years ago when it started being used, it was a reasonable assumption that this would work, similar to Regemate. I mean, that was a reasonable assumption at the time. And I don't think you could fault any veterinarian, owner, or trainer for looking for an injectable form of estrus control versus the oral form that was exposed to women. I think it's very reasonable. However, the reason we're here today is because research has shown that it does not do that. It does not suppress LH in horses, definitively. However, it still has a behavioral and calming effect. And so that's why part of the workshop aspect was really to be educational. And hopefully, by presenting some of the background and some of the insert, the information, the research, and the science, an informed decision can be made about this substance. Again, I appreciate you all for attending, and I don't know if the panel would have any questions.
I do. Can we see the studies, or how do we know that it binds to the GABA receptors?
Those studies have been posted on the USAF website.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure everybody...
Absolutely.
Can I ask some stupid horse trainer questions? Since I'm a stupid horse trainer. Does Depo ever affect estrus in a mare?
And my understanding, no. But Dr. McHugh, who will be coming up next, would be the best person to ask that.
Okay, I'll hold that one, and probably the rest of them. Good question.
Yeah, I have a question. You said it's not approved by the FDA for use in horses.
That's correct. It was never anticipated for use in horses.
Right. Are there, do you know how many other drugs are currently not banned that are also not FDA approved for use in horses?
There are a number of them, absolutely. The approval for use in horses is not necessarily the set criteria for allowing. There's many drugs that have crossover. However, I'm not sure what the purpose is in horses for reproductive progesterone at this time. It does not affect LH levels. That's a good point.
So the reason I was asking also is because we found that there is a metabolite of, I think it's pamelain that's from levamisole that's also being used off-label.
Recording from the switcher.
So to the degree that, we can look at what the off-label uses are being used for and how is it helping or hurting. And I think that's an important distinction to make, and it kind of goes a little bit towards.
Absolutely. When you have a medication that its mechanism of action has been proven to be effective, the intent has been proven, and you use it in a horse, even though it's an FDA approved, that's appropriate use of the medication. However, if the medication doesn't do what it's supposed to be doing, what its intention is, then I think it has to be examined more closely.
Wasn't there an FDA warning in human use of Depo-Provera in the past?
Yes. I'm not sure if it's currently on there, but they call them FDA black box labels. In 2004, there was a black box label put on the packaging where there was a concern with bone mineral density in women who utilize the substance for a lengthy period of time. At that time, the recommendation was for no more than 2 years on the medication at a time to limit the bone mineral density. I know since then there was a wave of information to suggest that was an issue, and now they're back saying that there is an issue with bone mineral demineralization. So, again, it's never been proven in the horse. We don't know if it affects the horse, but it may be something we need to look further into.
Is there other research that comes to a different conclusion than the research that we have available to us at the website?
I'm not sure specifically. There are a number of articles. Is there additional research as far as its effect on LH?
Yes.
Dr. McHugh will be presenting, I think, some of that work, but also there was another study in 2000. I'm not sure if Dr. McHugh is prepared to go into it, but progesterone is very, very important in sustaining pregnancy.
Right.
And that's also how it's used is post-pregnancy, maintaining the pregnancy throughout. So what they did was in Australia, I think this was published in 2000, where they took mares and they were over-ectomized. So they removed the ovaries, which is a source of progesterone in the mares, and then they tried to maintain the pregnancies on Depo-Provera, progesterone, and they failed to do that. All the mares aborted because it was not an active or utilizing source of progesterone. So that's an additional paper. Again, thank you very much.
I'm just going to do a quick systems check here for our next presenter.
stuff like whatever I can. It's like repeated spaces and stuff like that. It's pretty good. It's just gonna take
All right. Sorry for the delay there, ladies and gentlemen, but we'll welcome our next presenter, please, Dr. Hugh.
Good afternoon. So I've been asked to present some data on the effect of medroxyprogesterone on the behavior of horses and a little bit of the endocrinology. I think you should know my background. I graduated from veterinary school 31 years ago from the University of California, Davis. I then completed an internship in equine medicine surgery at the University of Pennsylvania, New Bolton Center. That was followed by a residency in equine reproduction at UC Davis. And it was followed by a PhD in reproductive endocrinology and reproductive pathology, also at UC Davis. I've been a faculty member at Colorado State University for the last 23 years. My focus is exclusively on equine reproduction, with emphasis on hormone therapy, embryo transfer, and the problem there. The research that we did on medroxyprogesterone, Depo-Provera, was done without bias. It was done on a need-to-know basis. We field a lot of questions from the equine industry, from veterinarians, on all aspects of horse reproduction, including reproductive endocrinology, estrus suppression, and there was no answers at that point on Depo-Provera and the effect of Depo-Provera on the equine estrus cycle. So that's why the study was done. There's lots of opportunities or lots of ways that people have tried to suppress estrus in horses, and I'm not going to belabor these, but there's a variety of hormones that have been administered, a variety of progesterone and progestin products. Oxytocin has been used, and there's some studies showing that repeated uses of oxytocin during diestrus for about a 7-day window can stimulate a horse to go into a period of pseudo-pregnancy or persistence of the corpus luteum. So that's been done. It's not very practical, but it's been done. There's a vaccine in Australia called Equity that is a GnRH vaccine that if we block GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which is a hypothalamic hormone, if we block that, then the pituitary does not secrete follicle-stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone, and therefore follicles don't develop, nor do they ovulate. There's been some intrauterine devices, marbles, that have been placed in the uterus, And it's been done, Gary Nye did that study, presented it in about 2000, 2001. And the way that that works, not very effective, the way that that works is by placing an inert object into the uterus, it can alter prostaglandin secretion patterns, and therefore some mares, anywhere from about 40-ish% of mares, will have a persistence of the corpus luteum, again, pseudopregnancy, for 2 to 3 months. Again, not terribly effective. There's some side effects of it, some challenges with that. It's certainly not recommended. And there's less use of that now than there was 5 or 10 years ago. Herbal supplements have been suggested as a way to modulate behavioral estrus. To my knowledge, really no clinical studies have been done on that. Then obviously surgery can be done to remove ovaries and completely abolish behavioral cycles and estrus suppression. All right, so from a progesterone standpoint, there are intramuscular injections available for natural progesterone, either a short-acting or a long-acting version of that. There are some subcutaneous implants, notably Cinevex has been historically touted as a means of blocking estrus behavior, and that's not very effective. We did that study as well at Colorado State University. This shows the implants of Cinevex S. There are 8 pellets in a line here, and those 8 pellets contain a grand total of 200 milligrams of progesterone and about 20 milligrams of estradiol, a conjugated estrogen. And in that study, we used a variety of numbers, 8 pellets, 16 pellets, or 64 pellets of Cinevex in an attempt to see do they block estrus. The answer to that is no. Cinevex pellets do not block the expression of estrus or cyclicity. There's simply not enough progesterone in them to work. I can answer questions on that if you want me to. It's not the main focus of this. Synthetic progestins, a brand name Regulate, and then there's a variety of synthetic ones that have been used. The focus today is on medroxyprogesterone, but others have been attempted. So we've heard some of the background on Depo-Provera, and its labeled use in women. And in the equine version, a compounded version of medroxyprogesterone has been used for a number of years with the idea that it may suppress estrus in performance mares. And in trying to, when we applied to do this study, I approached a colleague, Dr. Mitch Leach in Pennsylvania, to say, okay, I understand that it's used. It's not used a lot in Colorado, to my knowledge, but I want to understand the dosage, and I want to understand the treatment frequency. And she interviewed some of her colleagues, both veterinarians and trainers, and suggested that the doses that were being used at the time, it's about 10 years ago, 1,600 milligrams of medroxyprogesterone administered once a month as a dose, and then that would be followed a month later by another dose of that. Or one could use 800 milligrams, simply math, dividing that in half, given once every 2 weeks. Or another option was 400 milligrams to be given weekly. So that was the background of our understanding of how it was being used. And at the time, there was no data on the efficacy, either in suppression of estrus or alternating the endocrine pattern of horses. So the goals of this study were to look at the effect of medroxyprogesterone on a variety of issues. One is behavioral estrus. If that's what owners were using it for, was blocking heat, does it do that? Another one is on follicular activity. Does medroxyprogesterone administration block ovarian follicular development and block ovulation? A third one was on any other endocrine parameters that may give us an idea of, is this having a biological effect in the horse? And we did this by looking at luteinizing hormone production from the anterior pituitary. We had 18 horses, normal cycling mares. They ranged in age from 5 years old to 13 years of age. They needed to, in order to be included in this, they needed to express normal behavioral estrus. We knew these mares. We knew that when they were in heat, we knew that they would tease in. We knew when they were out of heat that they would reject the teasing to a stallion. And then we also knew that they were cycling normally, that they had grown follicles and had ovulated and formed a corpus luteum. So they were normal cycling mares, and they were showing normal behavioral estrus. We randomly assigned them to one of 3 treatment groups of 6 mares per group. And one of the questions is, I'm sure you're going to ask, is why only 6? Part of it's a funding issue. These are expensive studies. To have more than that would cost more. So we were funded to use this many horses, 18 horses. Again, randomly assigned, no bias in the assignment. We initiated therapy 7 days post-ovulation. We had a uniform start time. So the mares were determined to have ovulated by ultrasound. These mares are being examined every day by ultrasound. We knew the exact day they ovulated. 7 days post-ovulation, therapy started. Then these are the 3 groups. One group received an injection of sterile saline. It's a placebo, once a week for 6 weeks. Another received medroxyprogesterone treatment every week. We started with a loading dose. So we started with that once a month. I want you to understand this. We started with a loading dose, so once a month dose. 7 days later, not 28 days later, but 7 days later, we came back with a weekly dose, as it was suggested at the time, 400 milligrams for 5 additional treatments. And then group 3 received Regulate, 10 mils standard dose, 10 mils orally, every day for 6 weeks. And then from a study standpoint, in the determination of behavioral estrus, mares were teased with a stallion, so they were teased every day. The stallions were rotated. We had 7 stallions available, so that mares would not have just the same stallion every day. A variety of stallions were utilized, and this was direct contact between the stallion and the mare. So it wasn't at a distance, it wasn't across an arena. The stallions were walked up to the mares, and the mares were allowed to show behavioral estrus. And there was a scoring system. They were in heat, or out of heat, or coming in, or going out. We had a history on all these mares that they would show a behavioral heat when teased directly to a stallion. We examined them initially 3 times a week. Once any mare started growing a follicle, we then went to daily ultrasound. This is what we do in clinical reproductive practice. We look at them every day. We can follow follicular growth patterns. We understand follicles grow about 3 to 5 millimeters a day. So we understand the need to follow them daily and then determine do they ovulate or not. We collected blood samples. One group collected them for one group of blood samples was collected weekly for progesterone analysis, and then another part of the study, we collected blood samples every day for 10 days to look at luteinizing hormone secretion. The people that were collecting the blood, the people that were doing the palpations, the people that were teasing, were blinded to the study groups. An independent person was doing the treatments. And then we're going to get into the results. We'll start with the saline placebo group, as one might imagine. All horses receiving the saline placebo came into estrus, showed heat. All the horses receiving medroxyprogesterone also came into heat, a normal heat, expressing behavioral estrus to the stallion. And the ready-made treated mares, none of those showed behavioral estrus. And the duration of estrus for the saline placebo, 8 days on average. Medroxyprogesterone in heat for 7 days on average, no statistical difference. And again, mares receiving altrinijet did not show heat. I'm going to walk you through this table. What this is intended to show is the duration of estrus expression in horses. Now, at the bottom is the days, and the arrows show the treatments. Once a week. This is the big dose here, 1,600 milligrams, and then followed 7 days later and 7 days later down across here. And we'll start with the saline placebo. So all mares in yellow, all mares were in estrus. They ovulated, day 0, ovulation. Horses are in heat for 1 or 2 days typically after they go out of heat, after they ovulate, sorry. So they're in heat for just a couple more days, then they go out of heat. And so these saline mares receive the saline placebo here and here and here in the light. They're out of heat for about 2 weeks. Then yellow, they came back into heat. They ovulated again, not shown here, but then they go out of heat for about 2 weeks. They're back in heat, a normal rhythmic pattern of a 21-day cycle. And the altrinogen horses up here, they're in heat. They ovulate and they stay out of heat the duration of altrinogen therapy, all of them. And the medroxyprogesterone horses, again, they're all in heat, shown by the yellow. They ovulated, and then 1 or 2 days later, they go out of heat. Therapy starts at the arrow, and they're out of heat only as long as their natural progesterone, their endogenous progesterone from their corpus luteum was around. When that was dropped to probably less than 1 nanogram per mil, they came back into heat, every one of them. They ovulated again, then they formed another corpus luteum, they stayed out of heat. Once that CL goes away, yellow bars, they're back in heat, all of them. Follicular development. All mares receiving the saline placebo develop large follicles, typically horses 35 to 45 millimeters in diameter, and they develop normal edema. The edema in their uterus is from the estrogen being produced by the dominant follicle, so a normal amount of uterine edema, and they all ovulated. The horses receiving medroxyprogesterone, they all also develop normal follicles at about the same rate as a saline placebo, 3 to 5 millimeters of growth per day. They all developed uterine edema, and they all ovulated. And in contrast to that, the altrinogen treated horses, none of them developed large follicles, none of them developed uterine edema. Again, that's an estrogen effect, and none of them ovulated during the treatment period. This graph shows endogenous progesterone. Now, just as a reminder, medroxyprogesterone is not going to show up on this assay, and altrinogen is not going to show up on this assay. So the hormone that we're talking about is natural progesterone produced by the mare's own corpus luteum. So on the x-axis here, 0 is the day they ovulated. Progesterone went up in all horses. That's what it's supposed to do when a corpus luteum forms. This is once a week sampling. Progesterone levels go up in all the horses and then drops back down at the time that they're coming back into heat after natural prostaglandin is released by their endometrium. We'll start with the altrinogen one. Altrinogen levels stayed low for the throughout the rest of the study, because these horses, again, are not cycling. These horses don't develop follicles, do not ovulate, therefore do not produce a corpus luteum that makes progesterone. In contrast to that, all the horses given the saline placebo and all the horses given medroxyprogesterone ovulated again, formed a normal corpus luteum, lasts about 2 weeks. Then when they come back into heat naturally, with prostaglandin release, because they're not pregnant, levels of endogenous progesterone drop, and then during the next cycle, after the next ovulation, progesterone levels went up again. And you can see in the altrinogen treated horses down here, after the discontinuation of altrinogen, this green bar, then these horses came back into heat eventually when therapy was done. Therapy range was up here in the red bar. They ovulated, and progesterone levels went up because of a natural ovulation. The luteinizing hormone has been discussed a little bit before. All horses treated with saline showed the natural increase in LH associated with estrus. So luteinizing hormone is a glycoprotein hormone produced by the pituitary. When horses come into heat, estrogen levels rise. And with a rise in estrogen, the positive feedback of estrogen on the hypothalamus and pituitary causes a surge of LH. And that LH surge is what drives follicle maturation and then ovulation of those follicles. We're going to skip down to altrinogen. Progesterone, natural progesterone, just as a side, natural progesterone is a potent inhibitor of LH. So if we put horses on natural progesterone, LH is suppressed, and therefore mares don't grow without LH. You can have small populations. I'm going to start that sentence over there. You can have a population of small follicles. That is the follicle-stimulating hormone causes development of small follicles. It's luteinizing hormone that takes those follicles on to mature and then ovulate. So horses that treated with altrinogen, That's synthetic progestin with biological activity that blocked the increase in LH, and none of those horses came into heat. So medroxyprogesterone, again, all these horses exhibited a normal increase in LH as they came into heat and presumably had a rise in estradiol. We did not measure estradiol in this study. So here's a graph showing that. We'll start with in blue is the saline placebo. The saline placebo, as these mares came into heat, luteinizing hormone concentrations rise. This gradual rise in LH is somewhat unique to the horse. Other animal species have a dramatic one-day surge of LH. The horse has a broad LH peak, but nonetheless, it's a well-studied pattern of LH secretion. Medroxyprogesterone had the exact same pattern of a rise in luteinizing hormone while on therapy, and the horses treated with Regulate had no increase in LH during that same time period. The conclusion of the study was that at the doses utilized, a large loading dose, 1,600 milligrams, followed by once a week, 400 milligrams of medroxyprogesterone, did not suppress behavioral estrus, did not inhibit follicular development, did not prevent mares from ovulating, and did not block the increase in LH associated with mares being in heat. And there was no difference in efficacy in those patterns between medroxyprogesterone and a saline placebo. In contrast, altrinogest suppressed behavioral estrus. None of those mares showed heat when directly exposed to a stallion. There were no large follicles that developed, and LH secretion was suppressed. And none of the mares treated with altrinogest ovulated during the multiple week, 6-week treatment period. The final conclusion of this study, in the parameters that we looked at, was that medroxyprogesterone had no apparent biological activity related to behavioral estrus, follicle development, or pituitary LH secretion. Our hypothesis for why medroxyprogesterone does not work, as well as some of the other progestins that have been studied, but not by us, is that it doesn't bind to the equine progesterone receptor. And I put down here a lock and a key. If you think about the lock being a receptor, the key being the hormone has got to bind to a receptor in order to have biological activity. And if it can't bind, it can't work. Not every progestin has biological activity in every species. There are certainly some that have been tried in the horse that has worked in other species that does not have biological activity in the horse. And to me, from this standpoint, it appears that medroxyprogesterone is one of those hormones. And with that, I'll take questions, because I'm sure there's going to be some.
I've been getting fed a lot of questions. One is, in your 18-mare study, sorry, I'm going to talk wrong. In your 18-mare study, only 6 mares got the medroxy. Is it statistically significant to rely on studying 6 horses?
That's a great question. We use our statisticians to do what's called a power calculation. So they help us to design studies that have a strong probability of having statistical significance and to make a conclusion. We just don't do a study and say, hey, we're going to randomly pick 5 or 4 or 6 horses. We have the help of a statistician to say, what is the number of horses that can provide us with an answer? And so, to answer your question, I do believe in the parameters that we looked at, it was not fairly black and white. It was black and white. Altrinogest horses, none of them showed heat. Every single, it wasn't even debatable as far as did medroxyprogesterone alter a little bit the expression of behavioral heat. They all expressed heat just like they did before they were on the therapy, and just like they did with the saline, other horses did with the saline placebo. Would it have been nice to have 20 horses per group? Yes, it would have. But I feel very comfortable that within the parameters that we looked at, if it would have been awkward with 3 horses showed heat, 3 horses grew follicles and ovulated, 3 didn't, there would have been room for adding more horses. But They all exhibited the same parameters from behavior or ovulation. And so it wasn't, again, if we're black and white, then more horses would have been great, but I don't think we need more horses to define what we set out to.
So originally I got the impression that you did 18 horses total because of funding. But now,
We applied for 18 horses because that's the number that we felt would give us, allow us to have an informed conclusion. And we could have applied for more funding for more horses, yes. And so we're semantics a little bit in that, but we could have applied for more. But with help of our statistician, we felt that 3 groups of 6 horses each would allow us to draw a conclusion.
all right. Another question. I think I'm hearing that you don't feel that the Depo counteracts any of the behavioral effects caused by elevated levels of estrogens during estrus.
In the parameters, and I'm going to keep saying it like this, in the parameters of the study, because I've presented this a couple times to groups of veterinarians, and I get questions related to that. So when we tease horses directly, as we do in a reproductive context, when we allow the stallion to have direct interaction with the mare, all of those mares showed normal behavioral estrus. We did not, there was no training involved, there was no distance. Did they urinate less, swish their tails less, or do other things less? That's not the context that we looked at. What we looked at was what we were being told, that this drug was being used to block mares from showing heat. That's what we were looking for.
So if you're a veterinarian and I'm a stupid horse trainer,
You're not a stupid horse trainer for one.
you don't know me that well.
All right.
But I really believe that I see a difference when they are on that and off of that. I don't know anything about reproduction in horses or humans, actually. Is that possible that I see a difference?
I think it is. I think it is possible, and I don't disbelieve you. I've heard a number of people say that the horses act different when they're on this medication. I don't know that it's associated with behavioral estrus or blocking estradiol levels, the estrogen effect. I don't think it's mediated through estrogen, and I don't think it's related to behavioral estrus. As far as does it block other, I'm going to use a different word, does it alter other behaviors? Quite possibly, but not the ones associated with reproductive events, with estrus, and then the physiological events of growing follicles and ovulation.
Great. Something else got it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Can you tell me why some mares die after this drug is given, or in what instances have they died when they're given this drug?
I am not aware of horses
Because
dying.
I've heard that if it's compounded improperly or something, that...
I don't know. It's, to my knowledge, that's news to me.
Okay.
I've not heard of that. It's a compounded medication. It's not the brand name Depo-Provera that we utilize. We use the same drug that veterinarians and trainers were utilizing. We went to the same compounding pharmacy that was recommended to us to acquire this drug. But I wasn't aware of any of those type of adverse effects.
I was just reading some of the comments, and it was mentioned in the comments, so apparently it wasn't heard.
Right. We thought it was safe in that we didn't see any side effects in that regard, no health side effects.
Forgive me for not knowing this, maybe it's something I should know, but is there a similar study with the Depo in humans and its effectiveness under the same conditions?
I presume in order to get FDA approval, the question is there similar studies in humans as in women? Looking a little bit, and I hesitate to quote human medicine because that's not my area, but it has been shown, to my knowledge, to block LH and block follicle habits, to follicle development and ovulation. Other than what it says on the label that everybody's got access to online, I don't know anything about any other studies.
And was this paper published in a peer-reviewed journal?
Yes, it was. Journal of Equine Veterinary Science in, got it in front of me. in 2009.
And was there any concern by the peer reviewers of the statistical significance of your numbers that you had in the paper?
No.
Are you aware of any effects of altrinogest, say, on stallions?
We moved to stallions.
Just in the process.
You just kind of threw that in
I'm the
there.
last questioner.
No, maybe. I like how you just slipped that in there. There are three, to my knowledge, three publications where altrinogest was used in stallions, some for a shorter period of time, some for a longer period of time. One was done at Colorado State University, one was done at Texas A&M, and a third study was done at Texas Tech. One study used adult horses. I believe either the A&M or the Texas Tech study used 2-year-olds, and the third group, I'm not sure the age group that they had for their stallions. All of them showed about the same thing. So when stallions are not exposed to progesterone really ever. It's not part of their normal. Steroids can only be produced by the gonads and potentially by the adrenal glands in any large concentrations. The adrenal glands don't make progesterone, and the testis does not make progesterone. So stallions, males, are really never exposed to progesterone or progestins. But with altrinogest, being a synthetic progestin with biological activity, and those stallions that were treated with altrinogest, all three studies showed about the same thing. Maybe not every study did all the parameters that I'm going to talk about, but with progestin exposure in a male, in stallions, luteinizing hormone decreased, with a decrease in LH from the pituitary. That's what supports testicular function. With a drop in LH, testosterone levels went down. With a decrease in testosterone, that's what maintains sperm production. Then the testes got smaller. The numbers of sperm being produced on a daily basis went down. The motility of the spermatozoa decreased. All the while they're on altrinogest therapy. Some work shorter treatments, 2 to 4 weeks. The CSU study was a multi-month study. I want to say 6 months, about 15, 18 years ago. And then at the end of therapy, in all the groups, to my knowledge, all the stallions came back eventually to normal testicular function. With the cessation of altrinogest treatment, LH levels went up, testosterone eventually went up, eventually within a couple of weeks it went back up, and then the stallion resumed normal spermatogenesis. So there was not, in these relatively short-term studies, as in not years worth of studies, but within a month or 2 to 6, there were no chronic or long-term adverse effects on testicular function that was recognized. Nobody has done, to my knowledge, a study where stallions have been put on altrinogest for years.
And have there been any studies on using MPA in stallions?
Not to my knowledge.
And then, if looking at the paper information here, then it would apparently be a surprise, as it was to me reading your paper years ago, that MPA is not doing what we think or thought it was doing. Yet, again, many people will talk about it seems to have a progesterone-like effect. Is it possible that this effect is coming from another place, centrally or otherwise?
It's certainly possible. When we presented this to groups of veterinarians before, the questions I get was the same thing that you asked. It's a very good question, a very good comment that people have felt like there is an effect, a behavioral effect of this. But not everybody had the same level of I'll get the right word here. There were various comments as to it works, it doesn't work, and that's why we set out to do this. We answered so many questions about hormone therapy and what's effective that at some point we just said we need to know. We can't answer questions with no data. So we did the study. And again, we didn't set out to to prove one thing or the other. We set out to get data so that we can understand. And it was a little more, I'll use the word again, black and white than I even anticipated, where it had no apparent effect on reproductive cyclicity or behavioral estrus in the horse. I don't have any doubts that people have seen other effects. I don't know how those, on a science want-to-know basis, before I make a comment, I don't know why that effect occurs, but it seems like so many people utilize it and say that there's an effect. I have to believe them. I just don't know why the effect, how the effect is generated.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just two quick questions. And all the studies that you have done, talking about the science and the mares alike, are based on reproduction.
Yes.
It's not behavior around
Correct.
that.
Not
And-
behaviors.
Okay, which is very interesting to me. And the second thing is the environment that our horses are in, which is bizarre at best. Would that also have an effect on how these drugs affected the horses or not? Is that?
I understand the question, I think. We tested them, again, it's only for the reproductive parameters. I think I made that clear enough.
Yes.
We wanted it to be as clear as possible. If we're looking at, does this block behavioral estrus, we could think of no better way than direct exposure, teasing a mare to the stallion, allowing the stallion plenty of opportunity to talk to that mare, interact directly with that mare, as one does going down a breeding shed, if you want to talk to it that way. But in the context of horse shows where mares and geldings and maybe stallions are socially around each other, does it alter that behavior in that environment in a different context? I think it's possible, but I don't know.
Thank you.
So all of the mares that were given Alternagest returned to normal estrus after the cessation.
There were 6 horses in that group as well. 2 of the horses, this study was done in midsummer into early fall in Colorado. 2 of the horses on Alternagest, thankfully they were on that one and not this medroxyprogesterone, because then we could have said, oh, it made them shut down. 2 horses on Alternagest shut down for the season. They started to undergo that fall, winter, and estrus time period.
Okay.
So for the
that's
horses,
inclusive to have possibly more having to do with the time of year.
for those 4 horses, there were 6 horses on Alternagest. 4 of them returned to heat at the end of Alternagest therapy. 2 horses during that time course, they didn't cycle back, and it was September, October, and we attributed that to season.
And then the following year, did they return to normal estrus?
We did not look at those horses the following year. It would be unusual for horses. We have plenty of horses on Alternagest during the year, and they routinely, at the end of Alternagest therapy, within 2 to 4 days, they come back into heat and they ovulate an average of 7 to 10 days at the conclusion of therapy.
I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, for our next presenter, we have Dr. Jeff Vernon.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to attend your forum today. As a representative of the Canadian Equine Medication Control Committee, and also a practitioner with rather the unique experience of using both the brand name Depo-Provera product and also the compounded product, medroxyprogesterone. I've had international exposure to the use of this drug in performance horses. First of all, let me tell you that medroxyprogesterone is and has been a prohibited drug for use in competition horses in Canada. And although I can't tell you the exact year that we prohibited that product, we've had a medication control program in effect since the mid-1970s. We ban those drugs or prohibit those drugs in Canada, which appear on the Canadian Pari-Mutuel Agency's schedule of prohibited drugs. The Canadian Pari-Mutuel Racing Association is the federal agency or the federal regulatory authority that oversees the racetracks in Canada. We also ban those products which aren't licensed specifically for use in horses. You'll take note that Depo-Provera is not licensed for use in horses. And we also ban any drug which might either directly or indirectly affect the performance of a horse. And those are our three primary principles. We do have an exception, and those exceptions are stated explicitly in our permitted medication or our emergency medication guidelines. During the process of in 2016, 2017, we began actually testing for medroxyprogesterone within our competitions. Although medroxyprogesterone was a prohibited substance, we didn't directly test for the product. When we started testing for the product, we recognize now that our implementation of that testing procedure could have been better. We could have notified our competitors or our exhibitors that we were actually now testing for medroxyprogesterone, even though it had been a prohibited substance. We could have offered more guidelines in terms of what the recommended withdrawal time would be for those horses that had been administered medroxyprogesterone. And we failed to recognize as a group, our committee, the implications that testing for medroxyprogesterone would have in terms of not only the negative impact with sanctions and penalties, but also the adverse effect that would have on our U.S. Competitors coming to Canada to compete. A number of U.S. competitors were quite concerned that their horses had been given medroxyprogesterone for prolonged periods of time, yet couldn't get an accurate idea of how long these horses would have to be removed from treatment prior to coming to Canada to avoid testing positive for the drug. In light of that, we elected as a federation to issue only warnings in 2016 and continue that policy in 2017, whereby horses testing for medroxyprogesterone would be warned that the product was prohibited. The competitor would be notified of the adverse drug finding, but no actual sanction or penalty would be put in place. We felt that a year and a half is ample time for someone to have been aware of the prohibited nature of that drug, stop administering the drug, and have ample withdrawal time to have that drug come out of the system. As a committee, we looked at why this product was being used, and initially we were told, as you've heard here today, that there's a legitimate use for any of the medroxyprogesterone products, Depo-Medrol in Canada, or whether it's the compounded products being used in the United States. But as you've heard, even though it was purported to be a replacement for Regulate, it doesn't work like Regulate. It does not suppress estrus in horses. What we became alarmed at was that either because it failed to suppress estrus, or because it was doing something else, medroxyprogesterone was being administered at higher and higher doses at greater and greater frequency, which we became aware of and were quite concerned about. Anecdotally, we had information that horses that were undergoing laparoscopic surgery for things like colics, which had been on high doses of medroxyprogesterone for a prolonged period of time, were bleeding more intraoperatively than would be expected. We felt that the drug was appearing to act more centrally and had either tranquilizing or sedative-like effects when used at high doses and for prolonged periods. And basically, we felt that it wasn't being given for what it was supposed to be given for, which was to suppress estrus. So given that it violated or seemed to be in contradiction to the first three items I mentioned, it's not licensed for use in horses, and that it might have an effect on performance, we thought it was of critical nature that we actually begin testing for medroxyprogesterone, which we did. Although we recognized in Canada that the mechanism of action was debatable, there was really no debate and no pushback on the notion that the drug has an effect. And the drug has a tranquilizing effect when being given specifically to one group of horses, which in our competitions seem to center in the use of the product in hunters, show hunters. And for those reasons, we began testing for medroxyprogesterone, and we continue to test for medroxyprogesterone. And in 2017, we will issue warnings, and in 2018, the sanctions penalty phase will have full force. And that's been our experience in Canada.
Could I just ask a quick question? Thank you. Of the number of horses tested, can you recall the percentage that were mares and percentage that were stallions and geldings, and of those tested, how many were positive?
We had 50% of our adverse drug findings in Canada last year were medroxyprogesterone. We don't test our horses the same, our competitions at the same level that the United States Equestrian Federation does. We had a 50-50 breakdown between mares and geldings and stallions. We also, interestingly, do not allow the use of regulate in stallions or geldings, and we had a number of positives in that.
The effect of the Depo bleeding operatively, whatever the word was it to use?
Intraoperatively.
That's the word. Is that significantly dangerous, like, or just a side effect that was noticed?
It would be an anecdotal report, and I think that I'm not a surgeon, so I don't know if it's widespread. It's just come up several times in the course of our conversations that these horses that seem to get surgery are bleeding more, and then upon more questioning, they happen to be hunters, and they have to be hunters that have been on high doses of medroxyprogesterone. Now, whether that's cause and effect is unknown, but it was interesting enough to us that we felt it was another area of concern.
And have you in Canada done any studies on how it, like real studies on how it affects horses' behavior or as a tranquilizer effect?
No, not directly. But because it's not a product which is licensed for use in horses, and it does have obvious performance enhancing or altering characteristics, we ban the product out of those two criteria.
Have you had FEI positives in Canada with it?
Not to my knowledge. Canada is unique in that we actually have Depo-Provera. Veterinarians can access Depo-Provera. Our market is very, very tight in terms of the access of pharmaceuticals to competitors. We don't have wholesalers or retail outlets which competitors can easily access prescription drugs or compounded drugs. So any of the medication coming to a competitor would have to come directly to a veterinarian, and in Canada, the medroxyprogesterone, since our compounding pharmacies aren't as, don't offer such a wide range of products as they do in the United States, we'd be using the actual brand Depo-Provera. And the Depo-Provera is, I think it's 50 mg per ml, it's a 5 ml bottle, so it's only 250 milligram dose that most of the competitors would be using.
Do you feel in Canada that you've come up with a specific time that it stays in the system? I'm sort of thinking about U.S. horses going to Canada either to perform or as sales.
What we experienced, no one had really looked at medroxyprogesterone withdrawal times. And it's a difficult study to do, and we have entertained doing it in conjunction with some of our other partners. However, the actual product that you use to do such a study might vary from source to source. So we would recommend using the Depo-Provera product. It's a human product, so it's a standardized dosage regimen, or manufacturing process, as opposed to the compounding pharmacies, where you might have issues with consistency in concentration, etc. When we started getting a number of positives in Canada, individuals were notified of the adverse drug finding and were afforded the opportunity, as with all our positive findings, to have their blood urine sent to the laboratory for analysis. A bit of the difficulty you get into is, although our program is set up to allow an individual to test their horse on an out-of-competition basis for the presence of a forbidden substance, we will not allow them to game the system, if you want, and send in blood or urine to our normal screening process as you would during competition. So when you then sample a horse that's been given the hydroxyprogesterone, and you send that blood into the lab, it's a target test for hydroxyprogesterone. And when you look at a target test, that sensitivity is much more rigorous than it would be in the screening test that we would use during competition. So we were getting positives that were out 5-6 months after the administration of the hydroxyprogesterone following prolonged use. Now that's on a target test. We did not run any of those samples. None of those samples were run back through our normal screening process as time went by. Why your question is so important is because competitors really want to know, okay, we want to be in compliance with your rules, how can we do that? You've got to be able to give them an answer, because you're going to be, okay, if you have to give it for 30 days, you're fine. If you have to give it for 60 days, you're fine. We haven't and still cannot do that. And I don't think anybody can. It's so dependent upon the product you're using, the frequency that you're using that product, and the dosage of that product. But suffice it to say that hydroxyprogesterone sticks around for a long time.
And I guess it just leads me back to having to spend some serious time looking at this issue for us here in the States. I mean, that's just one additional factor leading us back to spending some time on it.
Well, ideally, and I'm speaking for myself, not for my Equine Medication Control Committee or Equestrian Canada, but ideally it would be in all our mutual best interests and in the welfare of the horse to standardize hydroxyprogesterone, among other things, issued so that a U.S. competitor can come to Canada without feeling that they might be in violation of our medication rules. And then because of the harmonization treaty which exists between Canada and the United States, therefore de facto be in violation of the U.S. rule. It would be wonderful if we could come up with something that would make sense. When we have U.S. competitors that want to come to Canada to compete, the U.S. hunters, for instance, they know that they're not supposed to and do not use hydroxyprogesterone. The experience this year of Canadian horses coming to the United States to compete, very few of those horses then felt it necessary to start giving hydroxyprogesterone to make their horses more rideable, seeking that sedative-like or tranquilizer-like effect. So those Canadian horses are not on hydroxyprogesterone, and life goes on. No one's died. Everything. The competition progresses. So in the absence of a clear indication for the administration of hydroxyprogesterone for a therapeutic purpose, our position was that it just made a lot of sense just to continue the drug test for and essentially ban the product in Canada.
I would say that having spoken to a top-level Canadian exhibitor as recently as I had dinner last night, that feeling is not the case amongst them. Like, they wish that they could do it because they feel like over a long period of time they could do less with their horses, and it would be, in fact, in their horses' best interest. So I don't, they were much less pleased with that rule than I'm hearing from you.
And well, no, that's why I qualify by saying most, not all. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of what you're talking about. But you see, if no one's using it, there's no advantage to giving it.
And can you restate, please, that it's not being used to prevent estrus behavior that is difficult to deal with? You know, with the mare that's trying to kick you when you're trying to hook her, or swishing of the tail, it's being used in it for other behavioral.
Yes, as we've heard, hydroxyprogesterone, Depo-Provera, has no effect on estrus behavior in the horse. It's being given for other non-therapeutic purposes. The action of the drug, how it works, is unclear. Yeah, debatable, if you wish, but it does not take away from the reality that the drug does have an effect on performance, which is identifiable and has been recognized as being a sedative or tranquilizer-like effect.
And how is that, like, is there been a study done on that specifically, or is that anecdotal?
Right. A Grand Prix rider was once telling me a story. He had some familiarity with the FDA, and the FDA, has these long licensing trials for getting any new product licensed. And back in the old days, when they were doing human trials, they used to use a lot of monkeys. And when they were using a lot of monkeys, unfortunately, the number they had to use was very, very high, 500,000 monkeys. So when the FDA finally came up with a drug that got approved, basically it had the approval of 1,000 monkeys. So when the drug got approved, it said 1,000 monkeys can't be wrong. Well, we have thousands of horses being given hydroxyprogesterone, not to suppress estrus, but to control some type of behavior for that tranquilizing sedative-like effect. And I submit that 1,000 monkeys can't be wrong. They're using it, it has that effect, it's doing something, it's working.
But, again, I don't think this is the time or place to get into it, but I think that tranquilization is a different word than, I don't know what the other word is.
Well, that's why I'm using the word sedative-like or tranquilizing-like effect. Certainly I would agree with that distinction. It's a very clear distinction. You're not talking about the administering of a tranquilizer, an actual pharmaceutical agent, which is registered and licensed to do that. We're talking about the off-label use of a product that has no therapeutic use, of course, basically to alter performance to affect the outcome of the competition.
And I guess that's two things. I had a conversation about the other day about an eye drop that was an anti-inflammatory and could it be used with the view that the horse showed on. And my argument was, listen, my horse doesn't feel right to me. I'm not going to run back to the barn and ask him to put 2 eye drops in. I sort of feel the same thing. If I'm giving a lesson to one of my old ladies and the horse is fresh, I'm not going to run back and give him a shot of Depo. I'm going to do something else. So that's one side of it. My other question is, do you feel that Depo, I just use that word, I'm not sure it's even right, but does that have long-term negative effects on the horse, do you think? I'm just being interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, as Dr. Schumacher mentioned anecdotally, the FDA did release a warning on Depo-Provera causing bone fragility syndrome in humans. Anecdotally, again, the intraoperative excessive bleeding, which has been noted during general surgery. But other than that, the risks of associated frequent administration of a product which is not licensed for use in horses has no reported effect other than that which is inherent in the administration of any intramuscular product on a long-term basis. And the question was asked earlier, is that there have been any reported deaths following the administration of hydroxyprogesterone or Depo-Provera? Well, if there probably has been deaths, it's been because of intramuscular shock was given intravenously, so it's the proper administration of the product rather than a
I've got a follow-on for you, Jeff. So now, the majority of the administration, what I'm gathering from what you've said, in Canada over the last numerous years, has been using what we would call an FDA licensed product, one that is attested to as far as what's in it and the concentration that's in it. Now, and I'm gathering that you don't have the compounding problem in Canada that we have in the United States, where we would have a wide variety of compounding pharmacies making this medication not FDA approved, and it would be at a wide level of various concentrations and safety margins. So am I understanding that correctly?
That's absolutely correct. The interesting question was raised earlier about our positive or adverse findings. They were all exhibitors who were competing at a high level, who had come to the United States to compete. And whether you want to take that as, well, these Canadians got exposed to it in the United States, brought the drug back to Canada, or not the drug back to Canada, but brought the use of the drug back to Canada, or whether that's the upper level and they're more aware of the use of these particular type of products than the average person would at one of our national horse shows. It wouldn't be known. But we certainly thought it was interesting that those horses had all been horses that were competing in the United States.
One last thing. I'm curious about the judging standards for the hunter classes in Canada versus the judging standards here, and whether the Canadians allow for perhaps a little more exuberance and more
Well, although we do have some Canadian judges, most of our judges are imported from the United States. So Jeff would be better in a position to comment on that. But I would submit that if everybody has the same, if the drug is not, if this particular drug or any drug is not being used by everyone, there's no advantage afforded to the class. The advantage comes when 1 person out of 10 uses the drug, or all 10 use the drug. And then the reason that we're not allowing everybody to use medroxyprogesterone because it has no therapeutic use in the horse, and it's not licensed for use in Canada.
And you would personally realize anecdotally, you would personally have some concerns on potential welfare. I assume that's why you passed on that interoperative bleeding.
That's correct, yeah. And you know, in our sport, if some is good, more is better. And so what's happening is, when you've seen it, is that, well, 5 cc's of medroxy once a week works well, 10 is going to be better. And why don't we give it twice a week? Why don't we try a little more 3 times a week? And it just goes on and on and on until there are problems, there are adverse things that will occur if you're taking too much baby aspirin for a heart problem. You know, one is good, you take the whole bottle, that is not good.
I mean, there's no question that it's a complicated issue, but one of the things that goes along with it is if they feel like this, even if they're incorrect, that they, as a placebo, felt that this was making it easier for them to prepare their horses and they did less lunging, less jumping, or less of way worse drugs, that's the piece that scares me, I guess. You know, when you hear stories of 180 cc's of magnesium before a class and yada, yada, yada. So it's a very complicated issue that isn't just about this drug. It's very interesting to learn about this drug, for sure.
That's why I brought up
It's a
the
big
judging
deal.
standards
Yeah.
too. You know, I think, to me, as a non-hunter jumper person, that to me seems to be a critical component.
We had a safety concern which was expressed here over the handling of regimen. When medroxyprogesterone was thought to suppress this risk, then you can make the argument in Canada we were more open to its use because we recognize that a lot of the people who work in the barns are young women and they don't wear gloves. perhaps not as diligent as they should be using the pumps that come with ready-to-make. Ready-to-make's very readily absorbed across with direct skin contact. Things get spilled. But when it was recognized that hydroxyprogesterone has no effect on estrus, the public health concern, which seemed to justify its use, was thrown out the window. It did help then that there was an injectable form of Altrendrogest, which has been given slowly onto the market to address some of those safety issues. But without a therapeutic use in the horse, we just don't see any reason that it should be.
And correct me if I'm wrong, just so we're setting the record straight, but the use of nitrile gloves in administration of Altrendrogest is completely safe. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just
just
thought we should set the record straight on that.
Yeah. And that's true, but the reality is that people don't do that in the barns, which is why hydroxyprogesterone kind of snuck in as a safe alternative, which it's not effective, so it's not.
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Mary Jack, USA Today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I won't be presenting much science, except for the little bit that I've gotten from scientists, because USHJ volunteers in general are not scientists. So I'd like to start off with, since I was very inspired by Dr. Hurd, the whole idea of habituation, I'll share a personal story. So for me, as a trainer, I've been training now for 38 years, and through some mentoring early in my hunter career, I did some stuff that I'm not real proud of now when I look back on it, and I really wish that I hadn't done it, but I did. And so there's nothing worse than a reformed smoker, of course. So I'd like to disclose that right now in my barn in Florida, I have 10 horses there, and I have 30 horses at my barn in New Jersey. And of my 10 horses that are in Florida, 2 of them do definitely show on Depo-Provera. One is a mare that is a jumper, so I'm definitely not trying to make her quiet. She is a witch, and without Depo-Provera, she squeals and kicks out at other horses in the schooling area, which is not safe. So that's why she is on that. The other one is an 8-year-old gelding that has sort of studdish tendencies. And I find that when we give him Depo-Provera, he focuses on his job and does not also lunge at other horses and just be generally disobedient. So those are those 2 horses. But I also have in my training program at home horses that are not showing, that are school horses. And those horses also, some of them use Depo-Provera. And they use it because I teach a lot of little kids. And some of those ponies are kind of grumpy, angry about being brushed probably improperly by little kids who don't know. And it helps their behavior in the barn, and it makes them that little bit safer in my personal estimation. That is all anecdotal, not scientific whatsoever. The other thing I'd like to say is that as far as off-label drug use, I'm a person who had some health issues earlier in my life, and I used an off-label drug because my physician told me to. That's not necessarily such a bad thing. I mean, I was given a drug for prostate cancer. Clearly, I do not have a prostate, so it couldn't have been for that reason. So I think as we talk about this more and more, and I really encourage the panel to look into some of the questions about whether or not Depo-Provera has a tranquilizing or a sedating effect. I think it possibly has a focusing impact on a horse more than anything else, just making the horse a little bit easier to train. But as my vet down here in Florida says, it doesn't make my horses jump higher, run faster, go slower, anything like that. It just allows them to be more easy to focus on their job and less on the outside aspects of what's going on in the ring. So now, I think that we have to remember as the governing bodies that we are here to represent our horses, our members, and the integrity of horse sports in general. And those things should be really, really important to all of us. So as far as the horses are concerned, I truly believe that no reasonable horse person would want to do any harm to their horse. I think that's really important to remember. I think there are many unreasonable horse people who do not care about doing harm to their horses. But what we would like to know from the USHJ Board of Directors is we would like to see science that supports that we are actually doing harm to those horses, and that we are, that there's something long-term effect that's going on. And so far, even though this presentation has been so fascinating, I'm not still sure that I've seen any harm being done here. As far as our horse sports are concerned, it is really, really important that we define two different terms. One is behavior modification, and the other is performance enhancement. So, using my example of Depo-Provera, in my personal opinion, being a focus drug, is that behavior modification, which I would definitely call it that, okay, is that performance enhancing? Where does that line meet? And if we are, in fact, saying that anything that modifies behavior also changes performance, what are we going to, we're at the very top of a very slippery slope, and we need to be a little careful about what we're doing, because then we're descending into the whole idea of should we not use supplements. There's a lot of questions about calming supplements, perfect prep, common cool, things like that. Should we use them? Should we not use them? What's actually legal? It's really, really unclear. In my barn, we don't use perfect prep. Okay, and I don't use it because I don't think that it fits in with the spirit of what our goal is. But I think I'm probably a small fraction of the people who do use things like that. I mean, I can tell you, I have a picture in my phone of being at the Gold Cup this year for the Maclay Regionals, and I have, from the aisle of my barn, 2 huge bags filled with perfect prep tubes. So I think it's important to be clear about behavior modification and performance enhancement. And we have to remember that everything that modifies behavior does not necessarily enhance performance. As my vet down here said to me one day, well, I'll give your horse a shot at equipoise, and I will definitely modify his behavior, but I don't think I'm going to enhance his performance for you at all. So clearly equipoise is not legal, so we wouldn't be doing that anyhow. So I'm asking the panel to look very closely into those things and help us understand where should we fall on that line. Now, our members. So I found this workshop to be really, really fascinating, but I'm not really sure that this workshop is answering the needs of our members. Our members deserve really clear communications. And the entry point to these discussions came from very indirect communication. So what do I mean by that? I mean, I found out about the whole idea that there was a possible ban of Depo-Provera in all competition horses and Regi-Mate in geldings and stallions through a text from another volunteer who said, what's going on with this? That's not the way a high-level governance person should find out that there is something going on. And in doing some investigating, I found, yes, there was something, a potential ban. And that's not fair to members. If our federation wants to make a ban on something, for a potential ban, it shouldn't be coming to us through rumors and innuendo. So what did USHJ do about this? USHJ called a special board meeting and invited Bill Maroney, Stephen Schumacher, and Sonia Keating to come and speak to us on this topic. And we listened very, very closely to what was said. And here are some of our questions that we would like the panel to investigate. We would like a breakdown on all of the horses with positives. And when we ask for a breakdown, we're asking how many were mares, how many were geldings, how many stallions, and which part of our sport. Is this all hunter-jumper related, or is it spread across other parts of the sports as well?
Mary, can I interrupt for 1 second? Will you give us those questions?
Yes, I will hand these. You guys don't have to write this down, I promise. I'll give it to you. You know I would never do that to you.
Well, I know, but they were writing.
Oh, don't write frantically, I promise. Okay, so one of the things that was said, and Steve and I hope I have my numbers right, the surveillance testing produced levels from 1.4 nanograms to 400 nanograms. So of course, we're not scientists, as I said, so Sissy Wicks was very kind to help me find a vet that specializes in hormones, and she, Kevin Price, the executive director of USHJ, and I had a conversation with him. We've given the transcript of the phone conversation to USEF so that all of you can read it as well. But I will quote what Dr. Douglas said. Those levels would be determined by when, in relation to the injection, you took the blood sample. If you took the blood sample 3 hours after you gave the injection, it may very well be 400. If 2 days later, it's very likely going to be 6. So the same would be true with Regulate if you measured it. You have a peak in the first 6 to 7 hours, which is quite high, and it tails off until it is virtually non-detectable. That's true with almost any drug that's injected or given orally. You have a peak. If it's oral, you have a peak within the first 8 to 10 hours, and it depends on the vehicle it's in. But 400 nanograms, there's no evidence that that kind of dose is going to be very short-lived at that level because of the vehicle that that drug is in. There's no data in the literature showing that if you give 2,000 nanograms to the horse, what does that do? There's no data in the literature that I can find. Those serum levels would be totally contingent on the dose given and when the blood sample was taken in relation to when the dose was given. So, science people, please don't ask me questions about that because I am just literally reading Dr. Douglas's words, and he can certainly be brought in on this conversation. He was very kind. Our proposal on this piece is, if in fact there is a problem with the administration of these drugs for no apparent use other than sedation of the horse, we think that collecting medication reports would be a great start. Because we do know, as our last presenter just said, that if a little bit is good, a lot is better. So I did a lot of asking around to find out from various vets and various professionals, how often do people give Depo-Provera? And the answer is, in my barn, for those 2 horses that I just talked about, we give 5 cc's once a month. A lot of other people give it once every 7 days. Some people give it once every 5 days. Some people give it once every 3 days. I know that the horse that I have, the gelding that's a little studdish, when we first bought him, he came with the instructions that he was to get Depo once a week, and I felt very uncomfortable with that, and so we backed him off to once a month. So I think study those medication reports, collect them. USDF has already done that with the 2 NSAID question, and I think it proved very, very productive. Now, we would also like proof that harm is being done through the Depo-Provera binding to the GABA receptors. And so at this moment, I haven't really heard any specific evidence showing that that is true. Again, I'm going to quote Dr. Douglas. I asked him, because there's some studies in rats, I said, what are the physiological similarities between a rat and a horse? And I wasn't being fresh because I just don't know the answer to that. He said there are structural similarities in the central nervous system. They both, in theory, have GABA receptors. All mammals have GABA receptors, so that's a similarity. There's no real good data in rats showing that. It just shows that progestin binds to the GABA receptor, but there's not a lot of data showing what it does to the receptor. There's structural similarities, but that's about it. So again, a question that we have that we would really be very, very interested to hear studies done on horses or animals that are similar to horses. Does Depo-Provera suppress estrus? Well, at this meeting, certainly we have learned that that is not true, although Dr. Douglas did have a study that shows slightly different results, and his study is published on his website. Then this is a question that we ask ourselves. Are Depo-Provera users trying to suppress estrus or modify the behaviors that surround estrus? So I would say, again, this is anecdotal. Clearly, it's been shown today that it does not suppress estrus, but I would say for my barn, the horses don't act in that mood swing, weird, crabby way that they have. Where that puts geldings on this whole thing, I don't know, and we don't have these downloads. The next question is safety issues with Altradigest, which is ready-made. So Dr. Douglas did tell us that there is a non-FDA approved 2 different shots that you could give of Altradigest, and that seems to be somewhat hopeful. But I will say, as a barn that has primarily young women in it, that we probably will never use Altradigest in our barn. Yes, you can put on gloves. Yes, you can ask young women not to handle it. But after a pony or a horse eats their dinner that has Reggimate in it, and that little kid runs up and kisses that pony on the lips, that's not good. And I know that little kids shouldn't kiss ponies on the mouth, by the way, but you try to stop them sometimes. Little kids are little kids, they're going to do stuff. So we really do have a lot of concerns about that. Our industry is primarily women at this moment, and women do have issues with this. But right before this meeting, I sent a text to one of my customers who's a very high-level gynecologist and asked her, should we be concerned with this? And her answer is, yes, you should be concerned with this. When I spoke with Stephen Schumacher about it, he said, well, it's reversible, these effects on fertility. But I'm not comfortable with Stephen or myself being the specialist on this. I think that when you guys are looking at this, I would strongly urge you to bring in a medical professor or professional, I can speak, that is their specialty, so that you can understand whether or not there is an issue with directing people towards using Altradigest. All right, now we'll move on. I had a very brief meeting with Dr. Holman on the phone, who brought some interesting information to me. And what he told me is that horses in nature have 3 needs: nutrition, fleeing from predators, and reproduction. And because of what we do with horses, we have taken away all 3 of those things from the horse's control. In doing that, we've caused these horses a lot of stress. And this morning I spent quite a bit of time reading up on stress in horses, specifically in competition horses. And I'm going to quote from Dr. Karen Malinowski's study, which is a little bit old now, it's from 2004, but she was specifically studying stress in competition horses. She says, stress can be defined as a general term which describes the combination of psychological and biological responses of an animal to novel or threatening circumstances. When the physiological response to stress is a highly complex subject and certainly not completely understood, scientists agree that there are 2 types of stressors. Physical stressors are things such as injury, change in the environment, and exertion. Psychological stressors typically include situations that make the animal anxious or fearful. Uncertainty and the fear of the unknown can be categorized as 2 of the major psychological stressors. Chronic stress and the subsequent release of cortisol has been implicated in many deleterious conditions, including aggressive behavior, decreased growth and reproductive capability, inhibition of the immune system, and increased risks of gastric ulceration, colic, and diarrhea. After having read that and really thought a lot about these questions, I believe that the questions that we're speaking about today with Depo-Provera and Altradigest are just way too narrow. I think that we have an underlying problem in that we have put our horses in some very unnatural situations and expect them to perform just really well without some kind of assistance to perform. And I'm not a big believer in medicating horses, but I think some horses are so stressed by our competitive environment that we need to dig a little bit deeper into this question and not just say, okay, well, this is a performance-enhancing drug, it's a tranquilizer. I'm not sure it is a tranquilizer. I've ridden horses that are tranquilized. Dr. Allen and I spoke about this earlier. He disagrees with me, and so I'm sure he'll bring it up. And that's good, he should bring it up, okay? But the horses that I ride that are tranquilized are horses that are going through rehab, and they're tranquilized for their own safety so that they don't get away and re-injure themselves because they're pretty wild. They've been locked in their stalls for a really long time with no turnout. There's a big difference in riding a horse that's been given a shot of Depo-Provera and a horse that's been given a shot of Democidin or acepromazine. They don't feel the same to me at all. And I respect Dr. Allen's opinion on this, but I definitely don't agree with him. So I'm calling for an extended period of discussion and study. I will repeat that no responsible horseman wants to do harm to their horse, but we need to a way to find to balance science and practical experience for the benefit of our horses, our members, and our sport. Thank you. Questions?
Fine.
Mary, thank you for your always thoughtful comments.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Before you even said it, I had written down about whether or not if we could do a study, at what level, when they're saying that this drug binds to the GABA receptors, at what level? And then just so there's a certain baseline level that we know exists in horses, and then how much above that is it? So I was curious about that as well. But secondly, I think as a federation, if it's not, if you're looking for some other result from this drug that is stress relieving or having a focusing effect, there might be other safer alternatives.
I have two comments, not questions, but I find it interesting. I use a lot of Depo, I love Depo. And I equate it to warm bloods. For me, it's the warm blood drug. I think we got warm bloods, then we got Depo. And I also, when I really thought about this before I came, I find that I use Depo on all different temperaments, being hot horses for sure, warm horses for sure, but almost in particular the cold horses. And I think all of us that work with warm bloods, I have one horse in particular that's a great example. I'm riding, he's a cold horse, I ride him a small runnel spur and he carries a stick. And if I get on him and he's particularly quiet, I have to get off and lunge him because he's telling me that he's fresh. So that's that whole warm blood thing, which is different. And Depo made a significant difference in that horse, and that is a kid's horse. I'm not trying to get him to go better to win the class. I'm just trying over a long period of time to help level his performance and keep things on a level keel. Not to win the class, but to make things safer and easier for the horse and the rider. So that's been my personal experience with that drug. And I don't even think of it as a drug. It's very different to me than a tranquilizer. It's different. So.
Maybe my experience with Depo is the least of, I don't know, maybe anybody in this room. I just find it interesting that with so many questions about it and how it works in horses, that you're quick to give it to a horse, but you're looking for reasons not to. And when I medicate my horses, I want to know that what I'm doing is safe, and I would not do it if they were not researched. So I guess that's my confusion with this. It's like you're looking for a reason to continue giving something when you don't have the facts.
That's a really good comment, and I would say, why did I start giving Depo? I gave it because my vet told me to, and I'm not a vet. I have to respect my vet. I have 2 different vets, one down here and one up north. Both of them recommended after diagnostic work, which is the only reason at this moment that I give medication to any horse. That was not always true, by the way. I used to have open prescriptions at Farm Vet that my vet gave me, and I did what I wanted when I wanted. That's no longer a part of my life. Now, if my vet tells me to do it, as long as we have a discussion, I feel very confident about that because he is an expert and I am not.
Right, maybe that's interesting though. Maybe the responsibility needs to be more on the vets. And I know as an owner, I do take it as a personal responsibility for the welfare of my horses to do my own research. And if the vet tells me to try this, but oh, it's not approved for use in horses, maybe then I question my vet or I do my own research.
That is, I would have to agree with you. And honestly, until this entire thing came up, I did not realize that this was a drug that was not licensed for use in horses. So shame on me for not knowing that. And it makes you a little bit more careful.
Yeah. The question, Dr. Douglas, what's the first name?
Bob, Bio-Release Technologies, and this is laboratory, BET Laboratories in Kentucky.
Kentucky. And do you know if the paper that he's referring to went through a peer-reviewed journal?
I wish I knew the answer, and I don't, but I can find out for you.
Okay. Okay. I didn't, that's all I have. Anyone else?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And our next presenter will be Sissy Wicks. This first.
While you guys are getting organized, can I just make a quick comment?
Yes.
I wonder, and I'll address to our group here, but if we can start getting away from referring to this as Depo.
Sorry.
Okay? Because it's going to confuse our membership. Depo simply means repository in medicine. It's something that is injected and it lasts a while. Okay? So there's a very commonly used drug, Depo-Medrol. And so when we use terms like Depo, we're going to get ourselves and our membership quite confused. If we want to pick an acronym for this, kind of the more common acronym is, again, MPA. And maybe we should all start referring to it that way because we are truly going to get, I think we won't get confused, but our membership may get confused.
I would say exactly the opposite. That's the first I've heard the initials NDA, and I've heard the term Depo for this drug probably 10 million times.
I can tell you a practicing veterinarian cringes every time.
I'm sure they do, but they're a very small percentage of our membership, is what I'm saying. So, anyway, we can figure out what's going on in the future.
Yeah. So,
MPA, or do you want me to use?
well, I think we've got to start talking about medroxyprogesterone because Depo doesn't mean medroxyprogesterone. That's the problem.
I'll do that.
I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Sissy Wicks. I've been involved in the horse industry for my entire life. I've been involved in thoroughbred racing, commercial breeding, in yearling sales, and hunters and jumpers. I am a trainer and owner and the parent of a former junior rider. As a rider, I won at the highest levels of the hunter ring and also competed in the Grand Prix level in the jumper ring. I'm a judge, a member of the USHJA Board of Directors, and a member of the USCF Hunter Working Group. I'm the editor of the Clad Horse magazine. Mary and I did not match the technical firepower that the USDF has produced here today, but we are here representing our 50% of the USDF population, who I believe feel disenfranchised and unheard. I am an involved member of the sport and its governance. Through the magazine, we represent a population equal to the entire USDF membership. We spend time talking to a wide array of equestrians and horse show participants. Our readership includes every level of the sport, not just the higher echelons and FEI level participants, but the single pony, backyard, local horse show enthusiast. And where are they in this conversation? Has the USDF heard the response of the USHJA members? We have a 7-question survey that the USDF sent out to those who contacted them on this issue. Is this one survey a fair representation of the experience of the USHJA and USDF constituency? What about the experience and opinion of veterinarians in the field? Who is talking to them about their thoughts on this proposed ban? After all, they are the ones prescribing the substance. The veterinarians that I will quote here today have one thing in common. None of them has been asked by the USDF about their experiences with Depo or their opinion on the proposed ban. I believe in clean sport. I believe in sport integrity. Is the use of Depo-Provera doping? Is it a performance-enhancing drug to a greater extent than the other legal drugs we use? After all, equine isn't a performance-enhancing drug. Bute and banamine are performance-enhancing drugs. Robaxin, IV fluids, dexamethasone, all enhance performance. Many substances enhance performance as we attempt to make our horses happy, easy, and productive to their owners. A horse without a job is usually not a good outcome. Is off-label use illegal use? Not in the field of human medicine, as long as a physician prescribes it, as Mary pointed out. Are we to extrapolate the effect on horses from the effect on humans? In other words, if the side effects exist for humans, do they in fact always exist for horses? Then if that's the case, we should be talking about the effects of Robaxin and the effects of dexamethasone, both of which are profound in humans, and therefore, if we use that logic in horses. As we have heard here today, there is no conclusive clinical research on the effect of Depo-Provera on the behavior of horses. As hormone expert Dr. Bob Douglas, whom we just referenced, said, all data on the behavioral effects of MPA is merely anecdotal. So let me present some anecdotes. Let's hear from our trainers, owners, breeders, riders, the membership that USDF is tasked to represent. Let us get to the root of the question. Depo has been used for 30 plus years in our business. So we have experiential evidence on these questions. Is Depo harmful to our horses? Does it have a sedative effect, as in making a wild horse calm? Okay, let me see if I can get this to work. Depo-Provera. Our goal is horsemanship. How can our horses have the best care and be the most content while performing their jobs? We all agree on clean sport. Is Depo-Provera hormonal balance, or is it drugging? This is interesting. The USOC, the United States Olympic Committee, does not consider Depo-Provera a female athlete to be doping or differentiate medals between those on and off of it. If they don't consider it a competitive advantage, why do we? Are rat studies applicable to equines? What studies have been done to show correlation? What is the rationale behind not doing a peer-reviewed, statistically significant equine study? Are human studies applicable to equines? If they are, we are not worried about Depo-Provera use in humans. If they are not, we have no data to say that Depo-Provera has any harmful effects. Okay, so here are some comments, stories, anecdotes from our constituency regarding the use of Depo-Provera. These are stories from users of Depo-Provera. In place of real quantitative clinical studies, these stories are our reference points. All right, so I'll run through these. So I want everybody to know that I don't have a stack of interviews that I didn't use. This is basically everybody that I talked to. And a lot of the vets actually all of the vets that I spoke to are female under 50 vets. And in our show horse world, the vast majority, not in this room today, but the vast majority of our vets are under 50 female vets. All right, Patty Harnwicks. I've used Depo-Provera for over 30 years and have never had a problem with it. It is safe and effective. I have no idea why U.S. Equestrian is going after it. They should come and see my retired 30-year-old horse who showed on it his entire career. He is as healthy as any horse on my farm. Dr. Ricky Brosman. I see it used in a lot of horses and have never seen a negative harmful side effect. Why are they going after Depo-Provera? Dexamethasone is a whole lot worse. Jennifer Bowersax, who's a very well-renowned hunter, rider, and trainer. I've used hydroxyprogesterone over the years on mares to keep them from coming into season on stallions and recently gelded horses to control aggression and their urge to reproduce, and other horses that I have difficulty with but cannot lunge or turn out for various reasons. I have found that some horses, after administered hydroxyprogesterone, they seem less bothered by spooky situations and seem more settled with their everyday life as a show horse. This allows me to limit the time lunging and prep riding, so less wear and tear on the horse. Also, the time lunging is more controlled, so less of a chance of an injury or re-injury. Shannon Bajarno, who I do not know, but wrote in, the use of Depo is one of the least harmful things we as horse owners, managers, trainers can use to help the horse adapt, adjust, cope with the environment we ask them to live in as show horses. I would think that should play an important part in horse welfare. Denise Finch, I strongly believe that banning Depo will be a huge safety concern. Dr. Hope Batchelor, it appears as though U.S. Equestrian is very focused on removing and restricting drugs commonly used by veterinarians in sport horse medicine. The most recent drug being targeted is hydroxyprogesterone. It is unclear to me where the research is that supports this medication having a sedative effect. I also find it interesting that we are exceptionally concerned about its use in show horses, but we are not concerned about its use in women. I am failing to see the thought process involved in the revocation of this medication. Dr. Kimberly Bordelot. As a veterinarian, I prescribe hydroxyprogesterone acetate for patients. I have prescribed it for gelding, stallions, and mares. In my practice, I have encountered some mares who continue to cycle and ovulate despite treatment with Regulate. I've been able to better prevent ovulation in these mares by using hydroxyprogesterone alone or in extreme cases in combination with Regulate. Heather Tinney, the USCF is also considering banning the use of both Depo and any forms of Regulate or related hormones in both stallions and geldings. There is no logical justification for this proposal. Let me explain my reasoning on this matter. Surgical castration is not only allowed in competition animals, but actually required in most cases where the horses will be shown or handled by a junior exhibitor. The administration of Depo or Regulate is basically a form of chemical castration and one that has been shown to be highly effective, at least in humans. If the association allows surgical castration, what possible logic could there be disallowing chemical castration? Dr. Rihanna Stahl, having dealt with significant adverse reactions to hydroxy, I have a little bit of mixed feelings about the drug. I've come to think adverse reactions we were seeing last year were a compounding issue, not a drug-specific issue. This is a risk we take with all compounded medications. However, I do believe the drug is a valid use in certain situations. While I think the medication is overused, I believe the alternatives that will inevitably be used to achieve the desired result if hydroxy is banned are of greater risk to the horse and riders than hydroxy. There will certainly be an increase in injuries due to horses spending more time on the lunge or being given more dangerous medications. Example, IV magnesium. Jamie Horner, another vet located in Florida right now. Morally, I'm on the fence about it. Of all the drugs we give horses, this is at least a hormone. I'm also weary of it because I was one of the vets that had a horse die after an injection. I believe it was the compounding issue, but it still scares me. After the deaths, my clients became scared and didn't want to use it, but struggled to find a way to help relax their horse. Thus, I have clients that return to using it and say it's the best thing they have. If they can only give one drug to calm versus God only knows what other drugs or training devices, i.e. lunging to death, maybe it's not a bad choice. Amy Ravenel. Depo-Provera is not sedating horses. In all of the years that I have dispensed hydroxy, I have not had an adverse reaction. I do not believe that it poses a safety risk or creates a long-term health risk to horses. I've used it in mares and have observed its effect in suppressing estrus. Dr. Laura Stokes-Green, I've used it for controlling difficult marriage behavior without any negative consequence. I feel it is a safe method for controlling marriage behavior. I have given it to many geldings without incidents. And my impression is that it helps to maintain an even temperament, which is good for some beginners who need an even-keeled horse and can't handle any mood swings. Meg Mullins, another vet in Wellington right now. My beef with NPA is horses have died from it given IM and given properly. Also, it is compounded. I don't have a problem with it being used to take the spook out of a horse. I feel they are safe for riding. I also feel they don't need as much lunging, a benefit. So that is our testimonial done. I found out I was presenting on Saturday, so that was a very quick gathering of testimonial. Regumate is not the answer. We talked about the dangers of Regumate. I personally know 2 women who have had severe health issues while trying to dispense Regumate in a proper manner, but it is a messy substance at best. Banning Depo makes the sport less accessible. So not only do we talk about we would miss the positive behavioral effects of Depo, but we also talk about, it always comes down to money. So the alternative, if we don't want to use Regumate oral, we want to use Regumate injectable. It is much, much more expensive than the Depo. Personal barns don't want Regumate in their barns because of the health issues. So now we're talking about having barns with professional grooms. I mean, again, another financial barrier. Research, not rules. It is time for a cultural change. So let's talk about research. Let's talk about real examination of what the facts are here, not innuendo, not anecdotes. We can all talk about the fact that the GABA receptors are affected, but we don't know what that effective is. We have no quantitative studies done. Okay, so we, again, informal poll, 100 U.S. equestrian members in 36 hours. Should Depo-Provera be a banned substance? Okay, 1% of the 100 said yes. These are just numbers, just regular people like us. The second question we asked, do you believe Depo-Provera makes horse shows more safe? 98% said yes. This is a call for data and transparency. So after today, can we send out to the entire membership the findings of today and how many, because many people today can't watch this and are at work. Please email to the entire membership data from pulling blood on show horses. In other words, whatever the data that was referred to by Dr. Schumacher, we would love to know that as a group. Please email the entire membership that debates like these are even up for discussion before they're told to us as a done deal at AEP. This is what Mary referenced. Most of us did not know anything about this issue until an AAP meeting when Dr. Schumacher got up and announced it, and the vets came back and told us about it kind of in an offhanded manner, and they were disturbed by it, but we all said, well, we haven't heard anything, it couldn't be happening. And then there was a Facebook post with the USCF logo on it, and by a vet practice who would just use a logo, and the fire was lit, and it became a very incendiary issue. So I certainly think that this could have been handled differently. What is going on with this sport? Don't leave us in the dark, uncertain about the future, and inherently defensive and adversarial. How do we work together to make it better? Everyone has the same goals here. The membership is thrilled, excited, and ready to contribute in bringing this sport into a safer future. Safer for our horses, safer for our riders. Here's a list of some of the people who do not support the medroxyprogesterone acetate ban. So again, these are people that wrote in, and just a smattering of them. The membership should not feel like they are in an adversarial relationship with the very people they are paying to help them govern the sport. The majority of U.S. equestrian members, when they look at the board of directors, the president, the CEO, and the in-house council, they don't feel like they're on our team. U.S. Equestrian says, if you don't agree with us, it's your fault, but in reality, if we all feel that way, it's U.S. Equestrian's responsibility to join us in this conversation, which is very important. Okay, so I want to say one final thing before I disappear into the darkness. I think that Dr. Schumacher, I think that you and your USCF cohorts have not served us well. At some point, everyone has to believe that the vast majority of us, in fact, statistically, the entirety of our population wants to do right by our horses. We are the joy that this new USEF campaign mentions and I can't talk anymore, singles out. We love our horses and we love horse sport. The way that you have handled this from the AAP meeting until now has turned you and the USEF into the bad cop. You've created an image of us against them, of men making rules in a back room with the door closed without our input and without our knowledge because we're either too ignorant or too malevolent to behave ethically. I think you have done our constituency a disservice in the way this has been handled. The vast chasm between the USEF and its membership has been further cemented, which in the promising age of this new regime, and I think we were all really excited about the new USA equestrian, it's very disappointing. Any questions?
Hi, we've never met. I'm Elizabeth Scott, Vice President of the Federation. I went to the Drugs and Medication meeting, which is at the Federation's annual meeting, which is where I first heard this topic discussed. And I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to about the AAEP discussion, but I believe in the leadership of the Federation. I've worked there now long enough to know that subjects like this aren't and won't be taken lightly. And that's precisely why we are holding this today. And I feel like some of your points are very well taken. You know, we all do love our horses. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is important to look into the use of this, to make determinations about it. And maybe, I don't have any personal experience with this drug, but I have personal experience with, doing the right thing and working on behalf of all of our membership. And I take that very seriously, so I want you to know that at least.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Due to some of the technical issues earlier, and for those folks here and those that are going to watch this later online, we wanted to make sure that we were able to show the slides that Dr. Schumacher had up. So we'll ask him to come back up just very briefly to cover his slides, or two of his slides, I should say, that didn't make it up onto the broadcast earlier. And then we'll close the invited presenters portion and move to our two presenters that asked this week as well. So with that, Dr. Schumacher, if you would come back.
Slides up. So just to review, these are the slides that were up earlier when I was speaking. Based on scientific research, I think we heard that today, specifically from Dr. McHugh. Depo-Provera reproductive acetate does not suppress LH levels in horses. And what LH levels address is estrogen levels for mares, and in male horses it's testosterone. And I know there's been quite a bit of discussion as far as providing the evidence of medroxyprogesterone's effect in horses. I can tell you, we've posted a number of articles. We can post more articles as far as how medroxyprogesterone acetate actually impacts GABA-A1 receptors. As I mentioned before, they're highly conserved across species. They're very, very similar. This is the way most of these drug studies are done. I also want to point out the reason it was even studied at GABA receptors in rats and other mouse and animal models is the effect that they were having, that this drug was having on women when they were on it. So there were some cognitive changes that were at issue And so that's why they've gone back and studied this drug. It wasn't just that they all of a sudden thought that this drug was having an action at this site. Other drugs that act at the GABA receptor are benzodiazepines, Valium, which is an example of it. You also have barbiturates, pentobarbital, phenobarbital. These are all drugs that act at the GABA threshold. One thing they've also found in women, when they are administered hydroxyprogesterone acetate, will actually reduce the seizure activity in women who are epileptics. And the reason being is GABA channels. The GABA receptors are very, very instrumental in seizure activity in the brain. And so that's when you talk about barbiturates, that's why people, one of the first line anticonvulsant drugs is phenobarbital. People are put on that, dogs are put on that, horses are on that for controlled seizures. And again, because of the mechanism of action. When GABA came out, when we were notified or became aware of it in 2011, everyone was at issue with this drug, GABA, the supplementation of GABA, an endogenous substance, because they were getting beat to show it. That was the primary complaint, was because there was a balance of competition issue, is that all these people were using this drug, and that's how they were getting beat. And that's where people were upset. When we first investigated, it was not identified initially that there was a negative impact to the health and well-being of horses. It became evident when we were starting to give it to horses, that was a concern. But just my recommendation is we can't rule out the fact that there is a performance-altering effect with the medication. That may be the litmus test for whether that should be permitted or not. And as far as a study or information to clear-cut identify the effect in horses, the behavior effect in horses, everyone's absolutely correct. We don't have one clear-cut study that says this is what it does. However, I continue to ask people, if it doesn't affect LH levels in horses, and it doesn't do what people thought it started doing, then why are they using it? And why are they using it in geldings? And why are they using it in stallions? And to me, that makes sense because there is obviously an effect on the horse. Otherwise, if there's no other reason to give it, if it doesn't affect LH levels, there's an effect. And the determination's got to be whether or not that's a concern or not. That's a determination. When I've heard a lot of people discuss today, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of those issues, that to me sounds like people also, when we discuss fluphenazine or sertraline, those are long-acting tranquilizers. They work by different mechanisms of action, but there's the same kind of terminology that were used at that time. And so the question's got to be, at the end of the day, is that performance-altering effect an issue for our industry? I think that is it. If you don't have any additional questions for me?
Were you aware of the deaths associated with the administration of MDA?
I was not. I mean, frankly, I was surprised. However, I think Dr. Vernon pointed out very well that if this drug was potentially injected into a vein, that I could see where that could potentially cause a problem. But I was not aware.
And at the two meetings referenced, the AEP meeting and the USEF drug and medications meeting, were those both open meetings, and was this just discussed as a possibility of things that we might do in the drug and medication program?
Yes, the topic came up based upon we had, I want to say throughout the whole year, we had 6 medroxyprogesterone acetates called by our laboratory in the U.S. alone. I take that back. We had 1 out of the country, but our laboratory called. We had 6 of them. Worldwide, there were 12. So the U.S. had half of the entire world positives for this drug. And that's what came out of it was people using it at the FBI level were concerned, and they raised the issue. Additionally, it became a topic of discussion because Equine Canada, as we've heard, started the prohibition, I should say not the prohibition, they started testing for it in April of last year. And they had positives. And so that was the beginning of the conversation. This is also a drug that we reviewed back in 2011 at the Veterinary Committee and Equine Drugs and Medications Committee, USCF, which were both open
any point in time, was it decided definitively, certainly not at the AEP meeting, which was informational, but at the USDF Drug and Medications, the committee thought that a consideration should go forward to the bank, to the leadership and to the board, but correct me if I'm wrong, in the structure of USDF, that is merely a committee making a recommendation. The board is who makes decisions, and no decision was ever made or implied.
That's correct. No vote was even taken on the subject. But there was a great deal of discussion. There was some support for it. There were some questions about it. But also, this substance is very unique. The way the drug rule is written is that it's specific to the mechanism of action and the potential to affect the performance of the horse. That's the way the drug rule has been written, and frankly, it served us well for nearly 50 years. This substance had to have additional scrutiny, and the reason being is because so many people have used it for so long. And this is a culture change, and we recognize that. But it's not, and like I said, when I've heard people mention the anti-anxiety effects, the settling down, that it's not a tranquilizer, it's not a sedative, those are all the same arguments people want to use valerianic acid for, and the other long-term acting tranquilizers, fluphenazine, Zuploc, Fixol, Reserpine. In context, the difference with this drug is, as has been pointed out, it sticks around forever. Especially, we don't know how long, because people give it so many different doses. It's long around forever. GABA, if you administer GABA, frankly, that's gone relatively quickly. So the effects of that drug, that endogenous amino acid, is very short-lived as compared to this drug.
Yeah, and I would make a statement that the concern and the impetus for the study of this actually came from numerous veterinarians and horse people within the committee and without of concern over this medication. That's what started this discussion and this process. Just so we're clear about how that came about.
I have a couple of comments on that, though. Stephen, you said something which is the drugs and medication rules have been in effect for 25 years and it's served us well. And I'm not sure that that is true anymore. And so, to me, this is, everything that we're talking about here is a part of a much, much bigger picture. Like, I think we really need to go back to the beginning, because in my opinion, in the process of fixing all the effects of the rule, we keep getting into things that are worse and worse and worse. So I'm a strong believer that we need to go back and look at the whole picture again. And I think that's the case out in the field. And I'm not an advocate of drugging horses, and if we have a sport that requires horses to be drugged, then I don't want to be part of the sport anymore. But I think that the still bigger picture is that we need to start the conversation, and we need to take enough time to have the conversation. When you compare this to Serpicil, or I'm calling it Serpine, I'd never used that drug at the time that it was popular. I had a couple people stable where I was. Those horses looked unhealthy. They were thin, their coats got bad, and you could tell that that horse is on it and that horse is not on it. There are a lot of very healthy horses out there right now that are on, I'm sorry to call it Depo, I'm sorry. So I'm not sure that this is the piece to pick on, and I don't, and again, this is my own opinion. I came here just to listen, and it hasn't changed my opinion. I'm not sure that this is something that we need to pick on quickly as one more small piece of the puzzle, but I think that we need to, as Sissy said, include more people and get more feedback and figure out what is right and what isn't right. So I think it's a huge, huge process and a huge undertaking.
And I don't disagree as far as going back and looking at the bigger problem. And you and I have spoken before.
Thousands of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I value your opinion on this topic.
Likewise.
And it's changed since the drug rule came out in 1970. I couldn't agree more. The venues have changed. We've talked about larger competitions, less area to move horses around, let horses be horses. We've talked about a number of different things. The business model has changed. the number of times the horse average competed back at that day versus today is dramatically different. And we've identified some of those. But with those changes and numerous other changes, the question is whether or not we want to make it easier for a horse to compete by giving them an exogenous substance rather than addressing the conditions that we're asking them to compete under. I mean, it's just,
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that that's the bigger question. And if we're going to spend time and energy, I think we need to spend time and energy on the bigger question. I'm not sure that we've selected the right thing. And from just being in the hunter field, and I don't know where it was or what, but we all saw something in print that it was a done deal that this was being taken away as of August 1st. And then we all saw the thing on Facebook that had the USCF logo. I understand that was a mistake, but nevertheless, for us USCF people, and I'm involved with all this stuff as well, we don't look good out there, whether it's right or wrong, and we need to accept that and figure out how to get on the same team again, because when you're out in the field, and I don't know about your guys' disciplines, but in our discipline, it's us against them, period, the end. And it's getting worse, it's not getting better. And our hopes were up, and they have been dashed, so it's almost worse at this point. I'm not saying it's accurate, but accuracy doesn't matter. We need to deal with the reality of the perception, and it's a big deal.
I personally, I like Mary's idea of using the medication report form. It has worked well in the past to identify the use of the medication, how much it's being used, and what doses it's being used would be very, very helpful as well.
I mean, I'm all for getting rid of the cheaters, but they're a small group of what they do to the horses, and that's where the new word I learned, anyway, it starts with an H. That new word that I almost learned comes into effect in that very small group, and it makes me sick to my stomach. I don't want to do it anymore, believe me. I've had enough, I give up.
And one thing
But I can still beat them.
One last thing I want to say. I don't think it's a horse drugging problem. I've always spoken to this. I don't think it's, we don't see horses doing drugs. That's not what I mean. It's a human nature issue.
Yeah.
It is in every facet of the world, at every business, in the human athletes. And I think it was 1998, the Sports Illustrated did an article. They did a survey of human athletes, of pre-Olympic, Olympic athletes, and they surveyed 198 of them, cyclists, swimmers, what have you, track and field. And they said, okay, for 5 years, you would take this drug, you would never get caught, you win everything, you enter. Would you take it? And I think all but 3 people, 195 out of 198 said yes. Then they went back and they said, change it. Okay, same thing. For 5 years, you can compete in anything you want to. You'll win everything you compete in. You will never get caught, but you'll be dead in 5 years. More than 50% of people still said yes. And that's a human nature issue. This is not a problem that's just specific to horses. Cycling, swimming, Olympics. You're talking about going back and looking at drug positives from years ago. My point to this is that even though the drug rule was developed years ago, some of those inciting causes and issues we have today that that people want to consider to allow certain substances in, maybe those issues didn't occur or weren't present back then, but we still had people using substances to get a leg up. It's not because of any other thing but human nature. So I agree. I think we've talked about this. We need to have a better, larger, more comprehensive approach to address the problems and not just tick off the symptoms. And I agree. Just talk so much there.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
So that closes the invited presenters, and during the period that Bill Moran described in terms of members could submit their comments, but also requests to present. We did receive 2, and we can accommodate both of them here today. So at this time, I'd like to ask Dr. Holden to come up.
Is there any chance of a little tiny break?
I mean, we're not live streaming it anymore, so.
I mean, really fast.
Can we take a 5 minutes? Does that work?
Yeah.
So we'll have a YouTube, Facebook, like that.
No, yeah,
Still.
no worries.
It's like that, yeah. So it'll be. Sounds good.
He went on Douglas' website, and he uses two words in this study. It doesn't have Bob's so this is off of the BET pharmacy website. So, scientists and so.
This is why I told you, I was over here read the transcript, but I would rather know.
So I'll correct it. Well, this is the study that you're referring to. That's not the system. Just reject. Sorry. And it's 500. Okay. We've got him on the test.
Yes.
If you look down here, control the days. Yes. 13 days and 11.3 days.
Yes, we're still. That's fine.
And in this study, the dose that was used in the experiment was 2 to 4 times published whether this dose might be effective in a small percentage of bears is unknown. However, the current experiment and dose it was not. Each study was instructed. The study was investigated. Did not do it. So that's clear. That's the only clarifying comment.
Okay, well, thank you, I appreciate that very much.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So there's, I didn't realize that this study was even there. So that the study we did, the study that was reported by Douglas, both of them showed the same thing, and it does not.
It's really clear to us. And I so appreciate you clarifying, but I too assume the horse world that are actually out there in the trenches doing it, although we did not realize that was not the effect. We see these other effects that we don't understand.
And I agree with that.
Yeah,
I so respected your comments. I'm trying to understand the effect and stuff.
Yes, that was good, so thank you. Thank you, that's
Just to
perfect.
clarify that, so across that little one on there.
I will. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
That's a good solution, though.
Yeah, he did. He came through with it.
Yeah, and as I just said, as a trainer, governance person, there's, I know I feel like I'm never live without any question. My school horses that live on MPA still live on MPA. They don't serve you like that, and I definitely see that. The ones that do can go up, and you know. I refuse to do it because I don't have girls working for me. And I've had problems reproductive problems.
Oh, todavía.
As an employer, I cannot risk that. They're willing to do it. But again,
Empezó mal, acá. Y ahorita, cuando uno de los doctores está con el corredor del podio, ¿no? Cuando él comenzó a hablar, me olvidó darle rico. Se perdieron como 10 minutos. ¿Ah? En el audio.
¿No siempre está?
No, porque yo lo paré. Yo no sabía qué tiempo tengo. Cuando tú hiciste el reset del switcher, yo lo paré porque dije, bueno, no sé qué tiempo. Lo puse en pausa. Y me olvidó darle para atrás. Si no es por Eric, me dice, eso no está recordando. Y Eric, ¿no está grabando?
Eric.
¿Ah?
Eric.
Eric.
Sí.
Y yo dije,
¿Se dio Eric?
no, Eric.
Oh, Eric.
O Eddie. Si no fue por el que me dijo, no, eso no está grabando. Yo le di, fuck.
es cosa usualmente un rehearsal o algo.
Claro, para probar.
Estuvo grave. ¿Qué se puede hacer?
Ya, it's too late. Sí, esas cosas se prueban con tiempo. Si el lo de Luis está funcionando bien, uno no tiene solamente la switch. You're gonna see it though.
Oh, no, it's good. It's fine. I just wanted to get it more stable.
It's a pleasure. It's your name. And all sorts of concepts.
The laptop is helped quite a bit with this way, but it's more shaky.
Glad you could make it.
Thank you.
This is the next presentation.
There's this.
No?
That's right, you must have done.
Bill slab. Yeah. Jamie, hey Vicky, are the mics still live? Are they hearing things on the internet?
If folks could go ahead and return back to their seats, go ahead and wrap up.
Okay, so I'll just email you.
So, is it okay if he comes up and breaks it? Well, I didn't think it was one of leave it that way.
All right, so I misspoke earlier, we'll actually put Dr. Miller out to present, so Dr. Miller.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Marjorie Miller. I live in Bradenton, Florida. I started riding horses back in the early 60s, showed saddlebreds, and changed to hunter jumpers, and stopped showing. I went to the ponies, junior hunters, junior jumpers, and the X. Stopped showing in the mid-70s, went to college, got my veterinary degree. Like I said, lifetime member of USEF and USHJA. Showed Grand Prix, showed the amateur owners, and then stopped showing probably in the 2000s. My practice got way too busy. One of the things that, and I also wanted to add that I presented a paper at the 2010 American Association of Equine Practitioners Convention on the use and abuse of medication in show horses. And I am a staunch advocate for therapeutic medication. And I think one of the things that we have demonstrated today is that the use of Depo-Provera or medroxyprogesterone, and that's another thing, let me correct that. When we refer to Depo-Provera, we're referring to an FDA-approved human drug. When we talk about medroxyprogesterone, we're talking about a compounded medication. And I think it's really important to make that distinction. But the use of medroxyprogesterone has not shown to affect the estrous cycle in the mare. And so in my mind, that is a non-therapeutic use of medication. One of the other points I wanted to make is risk versus benefit. Every drug, regardless, every drug has a risk and a benefit. And one of the things I found in the course of my practice is that my clients tended to conflate legal or USEF therapeutic, legal with safe, and it's not necessarily, that's a false equivalence. And so I would, to me, my concern is with medroxyprogesterone, we're talking about a compounded medication. We're talking about a medication that that has, well, it has been used safely. We don't know. There's also talks of adrenal suppression. So when we look at it, we can't just look at it in the context of one drug. You have to look at it in terms of the other drugs being administered concurrently. And, you know, we talked, I forget who was talking about stress in the horse. You know, when we're giving these horses dexamethasone, and we're giving them medroxyprogesterone, and we're giving them ACTH, or who knows what else they're receiving. I think as long as we put the welfare of the horse as a priority, we can't go wrong. So instead of, I'm of the belief that instead of having to you know, prove that it's unsafe, that we should prove that it's safe. And then my last comment would be from the paper, and I will read this. It is the sole priority and incumbent upon every individual involved in equestrian sport, from the owner, groom, trainer, exhibitor, veterinarian, to make absolutely certain that the health, safety, and welfare of all equine athletes be maintained at all times. Welfare statements are just words unless each individual breed or discipline places substance into its words through its appropriate actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question, if I could.
Sure.
So, having spoken at AEP on the subject of medication, you're probably familiar with AEP and their recommendations on compounding.
Correct.
So, it is the widespread compounding of medroxyprogesterone, given that there is actually, even though it's a human drug, a drug that's FDA approved on the market, is that a violation of AEP policy?
It would, whether or not it's a violation of AEP policy, it's broader than that. It's, for one, there is Regimate, which is an approved FDA drug for use in the horse. Depo-Provera, as I've said, I've been out of practice for the last couple of years. I don't even know if it's availability in the United States to equine veterinarians. I know it's very cost prohibitive. So the use of a compounded medication when there is an FDA product available goes against the guidelines of the AAEP ethical recommendations.
Thank you. And we did have Dr. McHugh, if we could. He had, at my behest, had looked into the paper by Dr. Douglas that had been referenced in an earlier talk. So I'm doing this so the group on the internet can understand what we're doing transparently.
All right, so I was able to look up, I'm looking on the BET Farm website, and with apologies and clarifications to an earlier speaker, it is a little confusing. The drugs that were used in the test of this this paper evaluation of injectable sustained release progestin formulations for suppression of estrus and ovulation in mares. William Storer is the first author, and it was published in Journal of Equine Veterinary Science in 2009. And the clarification issue is multiple drugs were tested, 3 of which were altrinogest, one of which was called MP500, and that was compared to a placebo and MPA, medroxyprogesterone. There were 6 mares in each group again, and the bottom line is medroxyprogesterone, the interval from treatment to ovulation was 11.3 days. The control group was 13.1 days. There was no statistical difference between the return to estrus for mares given medroxyprogesterone or a control group. There was differences when they were given Altritigest. In the last paragraph of the discussion, to paraphrase, treatment with MPA, compounded product, the dose used in the current experiment, 1 gram, was 2 to 4 times the published common dose. Whether this dose might be effective in a small percentage of mares is unknown. However, in the current experiment and dose, it was not. So the bottom line for that study that was on the BET website that was referred to earlier that might suggest that MPA did block estrus or prevent ovulation, the answer to that is no, it did not.
So it's consistent with your work then?
It absolutely consistent, no difference.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McHugh. So we've heard a lot of comments today. In listening to what everybody had to say, there's definitely some key themes here that people brought up. Habituation, culture, money is the theme. Vet responsibility, the changing and evolving environment, and what are the factors that are different now for our horses and competitors than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. The risk versus the benefit of medications, the welfare of the horse, the safety of riders and handlers. I implore you to read the information on the website. If there are additional research papers that people have found, if you send them to us, we'll post them to the webpage as well. All of the research referred to by the USCF presenters and Dr. McHugh and others is available there. Talk to your vets. Talk to professionals in the environment. Talk to other vets that maybe you haven't used before, that you want opinions from. The video of this will be available on demand and stay on the USCF website through the USCF network. The research is posted on the website. Continue to send your questions. All of the questions in any presentations that were done today will be answered, as we said, by April 30th, and those answers will be posted online. The question period is open through the 20th of March on the USCF webpage through the 2017 workshop at uscf.org. I think the most important thing is this is a big conversation. As several people said, I think Jeff referred to, and others did, it's evolving, and it's not just about this one medication. It's about what we're doing in the sport, what we're asking horses to do, what our expectations are nowadays, what's realistic for what we're doing, and do changes also need to be made in how we compete in our competition environment. And that goes back to habituation and culture. Are we just doing what we've constantly done and we're just trying to make little tweaks here and there, or do we actually have to step back and look at the sport and pause for a minute and say, let's have a do-over? And let's talk about the issues. We're all talking about the same thing: safety, welfare of our horses, safety and welfare of our riders and handlers. Okay, how do we provide the best environment to do that doesn't make people feel that they have to turn to medications to make that happen with the horse? So I think that's a big, huge conversation to have over the next few months. And I don't know the answers standing before you today. I don't know that anybody sitting in this room has all the answers to all the questions. But the questions have to get asked, and the information has to get out there, and we have to have debates on it. And I'm sure that USHJ, Mary will continue to have town halls, and we'll get information back. And I think that's important. But I think what's most important is you try to educate yourself so you make informed decisions. And we're not just making decisions based off what the next person in the line said. But we are going to research. We are asking the right questions of professionals that are educated on these matters. And if we find out what we need to for the board of the USCF to make the right decision for the benefit of the sport in the end, and for the benefit of our horses and our handlers and riders. So I want to thank you all for coming today. It's hard to stand up here in front of people. We know you're going to take a lot of flack on the internet, no matter what you say. So I want to say thanks to every presenter who was willing to get up here. Thanks to the panel who's willing to serve and listen to everything that goes on. I mean, we have Olympians, world champions, well-respected trainers, riders, and horsemen and veterinarians. And I applaud you for all giving your time to be willing to do this over the next few months and to be here today. And again, to all the presenters, great job. Thank you very much. And please, anybody out there who has been watching or listening, share with your friends that this is on the internet through USDF.org. Go to the network and you will find the on-demand. It'll probably take till tomorrow morning to have the on-demand available, but it'll be there, and all of the PowerPoints that were shown today will also be added to the website as well. So everybody will have access to all the information that was shown here today.
And we will be doing another town hall.
Yes, we will be planning another event. Yep. I don't know the date and time yet, but we'll be planning it. But it's not a town hall, it's a workshop. There is a difference.
On MPA.
Mary will be conducting town halls. All right, thank you all very much, especially those that came a long distance. We really appreciate it, and good afternoon. Thank you.